Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this special meeting of the Arlington Heights Village Board to order on Monday, May 13, 2019, and ask if you would please rise and join the Village Board in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would the clerk please call the roll?
Trustee Rosenberg.
Here.
Trustee Padovani.
Here.
Trustee Schwingbeck.
Here.
Trustee Tinaglia.
Here.
Trustee Baldino.
Here.
Trustee LaBedz.
Here.
Trustee Scaletta.
Here.
Trustee Canty.
Here.
President Hayes.
Here. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the Village Board meeting minutes from our meeting on May 6, 2019. Are there any changes or passes?
Pass.
Passed by Trustee Rosenberg. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
By Trustee Tinaglia, seconded by Trustee LaBedz. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There are no accounts payable to approve tonight, so or recognitions and presentations. So we move on to citizens to be heard. And I have no blue cards from anyone who wishes to address the board on an item not on the agenda. Is that correct? All right, seeing none, we will move on then to old business, and there is none, and there is also no consent agenda. So we'll move on to new business, and I think the item that most of you are here tonight for is the appointment of our President Pro Tem. No? Well, just in case you don't know, I am required by Village Code to appoint a President Pro Tem by the second Monday in May following a municipal election. And President Pro Tem is someone who is currently sitting on the board, has been duly elected by the people, and fills in for the mayor when I'm not here. So it could be at a village board meeting, could be at a number of different events. And so the first person that would be called is the duly appointed President Pro Tem, and then first person that I always look to in terms of other activities as well. So this is a very important person. And so we very much appreciate Trustee Carol Blackwood's service and Trustee Tom Glasgow before her. And so it's my recommendation with the consent of the Village Board. And I know that this individual is someone who's very well respected by not just the members of the board and staff, but all members of the community as well. And so my recommendation to fill this very important position is our senior trustee, Bert Rosenberg. Bert, again, is our senior trustee, having been appointed to the village board by Mayor Mulder in 2000 after serving on the Environmental Control Commission for 13 years. He was subsequently elected as village trustee in 2001, and since re-elected and continued to represent the village of Arlington Heights in a very professional and responsible manner for nearly 20 years now as an elected representative of this community. Bert's historical perspective, financial expertise, and reputation within the community, I think, will serve all of us very well in this role. So again, it's my recommendation that the village board concur with the appointment of Bert Rosenberg as President Pro Tem, and I'd open it up to the board for a motion or a discussion. Trustee Scaletta.
Thank you, Mayor. I think you made a great decision. Bert has always been one that I've looked to, especially when it comes to the budget, and serves this village board very well and serves the community well. And I would move to concur with the mayor's appointment.
Second.
Motion by Trustee Scaletta, seconded by Trustee Tinaglia. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Well, congratulations, President Pro Tem Rosenberg. It's unanimous.
Thank you, Mayor.
And I know you're going to do a great job in this position, as you have in all of your other elected and appointed responsibilities. So any word as you begin this term of office in this new role?
I just thank you for the honor and the pleasure of serving at your command for the next 2 years, and appreciate the opportunity, and I believe I'll be able to serve the community well as I had over the last 18 and a half years. So I appreciate the opportunity. And we live in a great community, as you refer to it, second to none. and I wish to continue that in your absence. So, thank you.
All right, thanks, Bert. If nothing further, then we would move on to the
Can't hear.
second, Trustee Canty.
There's a volume issue.
Is there a volume issue with the microphone? Kevin, are you back there? We're good? Okay. All right, thanks. All right, we'll move on then to the second item under new business. And I would first have, this is the Arlington 425 project, obviously. And so I would first call on Trustee Tinaglia.
Thanks, Mayor Hayes. Tonight, my firm, Tinaglia Architects, is the architect of record for this project. So it is important for me to, as I have through this entire 2-year process, recuse myself from discussions, voting, and deliberations. So I'm going to leave the room and allow you folks to take care of business as you always do.
All right, thank you, Trustee Tinaglia. All right, before we have the petitioner come up and make their initial presentation, let me just make some introductory comments. Arlington Heights, if you don't know, has been voted the best place to live by the readership of the Daily Herald for a number of years now, and I know it's in the running for this year's voting as well, and that's because of the wisdom of a lot of special people that came before us, the people who are sitting in these seats right now, in a number of different ways, and the reputation that those people have earned over many, many decades now. And so I think this evening is critically important to the village of Arlington Heights for a number of reasons. First and foremost, the nature of this development and what it means to the village of Arlington Heights, but also how we conduct ourselves over the course of the next 2 to 3 hours. Hopefully we can keep it to 3 hours. But I think it's very important in terms of how we conduct ourselves tonight, both the board and the audience. And so I'm very much expecting all of us to comport ourselves with the appropriate standards of conduct. The process in terms of where we're going this evening, we do have a special meeting tonight. And some people were wondering why we had to hold a special meeting for this, why it appears to at least some that we might be pushing this project through. And that's really, couldn't be anything further from the truth. We had intended to have this project up for vote before the village board last Monday night, May 6th. But we did have to, because of the Housing Commission's deliberations, their need for a second meeting last Monday, we had to put our village board meeting over so that we would have their recommendation before we entered our deliberations and vote. And so as a result of that, and as a result of some expected absences from key members of our staff and key village board members, including myself, either on our May 20th meeting or on our June 3rd meeting, we felt that it was appropriate to handle this project now on Monday, May 13th, rather than wait until our second meeting in June, which would delay the developer in terms of their progress on this, if it should pass, and would also delay a vote for the residents in terms of their uncertainty with what's going to be happening in their neighborhood. So we felt it was in the best interest of this entire community, all those impacted, all those involved, by moving forward with this special meeting tonight. So, no shady dealings going on here. This was, we're in accordance with all notice requirements and legal requirements in terms of holding this special meeting here this evening. And the other thing I wanted to say, just in terms of transparency before we move forward, I can't think of any project in the 28 years that I've been on this village board that's held more public meetings for residents to participate in and those who are interested or impacted in providing comment on. And just by way of explanation of the public meetings that have been held on this particular development, there's been 2 open house meetings held by the developer, an early review by the village board, 3 design commission meetings, 2 housing commission meetings, 2 plan commission meetings, and many of the details of this particular project have been published. In fact, all of the details of this project have been published on our website, which was up and running in October of 2018. And so that information was available, and also on our social media posts. There have been 9 social media posts to Nextdoor, Facebook, and Twitter regarding this project in 2019 alone. And so I think that the public and those interested in commenting and providing input on this have really been heard, and you're going to have another opportunity yet tonight. And your comments will not be limited tonight other than the 3-minute time limit. So any and all issues that are related to this project are open for discussion. One other thing I wanted to say just in terms of decorum here tonight, and who's seen The Quiet Man? Great movie with John Wayne, Maureen O'Hara. I would expect more people to have seen this movie. My wife's favorite movie. It's a great, great movie. But there's a actor in there who plays the matchmaker, who's in charge of the courtship of John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara. And that's Micheline O'Flynn. And as they're beginning their courtship, he's in charge of their decorum as they're beginning their dating process. And Micheline, if you watch the movie, guides them and directs them, asks them to observe the proprieties at all times, if you please. And so I would ask all of us tonight to observe the proprieties as we move forward with our hearing tonight in terms of socially accepted behavior. And I know I've said this before. A lot of you were here for prior village board meetings where I've had to make this admonition. But that includes no cheering or clapping. I understand there's passion on both sides. But if I allowed cheering and clapping, I'd also have to allow booing and hissing and throwing of rotten tomatoes. And so just to quell and quash all of that kind of behavior, please, no clapping, no cheering, no booing, no hissing, and let's reflect the reputation that we've earned for respect to each other, both this way amongst the audience members and this way from this board to the audience and vice versa. So those are the rules as we're going to move forward. We're going to begin with a presentation by the developer, the petitioner, and then we will have a relatively short presentation by Charles Perkins, our Director of Planning and Community Development. Then we'll come to the board for just clarification of any issues that they think needs to be addressed before we go to the audience that might perhaps shortcut audience questions or comments. So again, I just asked the board to hold their initial questions just for clarification to anything that might be unclear. Then we'll go to the audience for comment, again, limited to 3 minutes. Perhaps if you have the same thing to say that someone right before you said, you don't need to take your whole 3 minutes. So you can just say, I wholeheartedly concur with the person who just spoke for the same reasons. Or if you want to designate a spokesman for a group of a number of people, that would be acceptable as well. So I don't want to stifle input from the audience, but I just want to give some guidelines that will hopefully get us all to the ultimate conclusion of a vote, again, within that 2 to 3 hour time frame. So with all that in mind, we will then come back to the board after the audience comments for deliberation and comment and vote. So any questions on that in terms of the process from the board? Okay. All right, Mr. Fursell and Mr. Adriani, who's going to go first? And Mr. Adriani, if you just introduce yourself for the record, please.
Good evening. My name is Bruce Adriani, and I appear before you, first of all, thanking staff, thanking the board, the commissions, and the public also. But also of great importance is the team that we have for this particular project. Everybody that we have on our team are seasoned veterans appearing to work before you in Arlington Heights for a great many years. My experience in Arlington Heights goes back to when I first started doing work as a laborer and mechanic back in 1973 on different projects over by Wilkie Road. I've worked on different developments from a developer point of view since the late 70s and up until now. I've worked on projects that you may know, Wing and Pine, I've worked at Town Place, at Vale and Northwest Highway. I've worked on the Campbell Building and the Village Green development, and I take great pride in what I do. A lot of the decisions that we make are well thought out decisions, not done by ourselves, but a different team that we have before you tonight, and done with the conclusion of staff's comments, the village's comments, and also the public's comments at heart, as evidenced before by the different open house meetings that we had on our site. The property goes back to when this was purchased back in 2000. That's a long time. I had hoped to bring this development sooner, but several severe economic downturns and cycles intervened. And it was during one of these cycles that the village expanded the Vale Garage. So everything works out for a reason and a purpose. So in that respect, it's been quite well for everybody. In the last decade, little to nothing has been developed downtown. However, we've had many charitable organizations utilize the presence of our property. We've even had the village utilize our property for the parking of the cars and trucks when they were doing the Village Garage expansion. So that's worked out well for everybody. And now is the time that we move forward with a development called Arlington 425 that appears before you. This particular development has come about because of the observation and the evolution of the downtown, along with the developments that have taken place, and by working with the staff, we've worked with our partners, we've worked with the neighbors, trying to create a vision that continues the spirit of downtown, and one that would make the village proud of this development as we move forward. So I thank you, and I appreciate appearing before you, and with this particular time in our process, I'll introduce Mike Purcell, who is the attorney for the group.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Adriani.
Thank you, Bruce. My name's Michael Purcell, attorney for Arlington 425. We're going to do a very brief summary of the project. There are, hard to believe, but there may be people who are not familiar with it. And I think it's incumbent upon us to give a broad view without taking time to go into a significant amount of minutia. With that, in summary, we are proposing a Class A 3-building and 565 space parking garages. It's on the 2.868 acres of vacant land identified as part of Block 425 in the Arlington Heights Downtown Master Plan. It's located between Campbell, Highland, Vale, and 150 feet north of Chestnut on the south. The village has created a downtown master plan. It designates this parcel as B5 development, which is exactly what we are requesting the village to approve. Currently, there are 17 lots, 13 of which are already zoned B5. So we're also seeking to zone the remaining 4 lots. Only one is on Chestnut, 3 front Highland. The 3 that front Highland are basically butt up against the Vale Street Garage, extension of the Vale Street Garage, and it will be a 1-lot planned unit development. Of very significant importance from day one, we have done our very best and have accomplished one of the goals of our team is not seeking any variances for density, height, or parking. 3 very sensitive issues within the village. And related to parking, according to the village code, the bedroom mix we have with the units, code calls for 454 parking spaces. We are providing 565. We're providing 111 additional parking spaces, all in the 2 garages, 507 in the Highland garage and 58 in the underground garage of the Chestnut building. The cost of these additional spaces is approximately $3.1 million. In addition to that, due to the proximity of the Vale Street to garage, which is right on the property line, and the fact that we are going to be building a 13-story building, issues have come up that we need to make sure that the integrity of both the Vale garage as well as the Highland building are never in conflict, and that integrity has to remain in place. One of our team members is Power Construction. We believe if one of the best, if not the best, general contractor with a phenomenal reputation. They have done a very significant amount of study and have quantified the cost of making sure that both garages are sturdy, maintain their integrity, is an additional $750,000 in cost to this project. We've spent 2 years trying to get to where we are today. The mayor has already discussed how many meetings we have had. What wasn't discussed is the countless meetings we have had with staff. The staff has been unbelievably accessible. Their suggestions have been phenomenal, and we have worked extremely hard. We, meaning staff and us, to go through the various areas so that we can stand before you tonight and say we are fully in accord with all of staff's recommendations on every level. And hopefully Charles will present those, but at the Plan Commission, at the Design Commission, and at the Housing Commission, we agreed with staff's presentations at each. We wanted you to know that we'll get into a little more detail on a couple of these later. We stand ready to answer any questions that the board might have. But at this time, I'm going to call upon Rob Lasselyoung from Tinaglia Architects to give a brief presentation about the site and show you the pretty buildings.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Purcell.
Good evening, Mayor, trustees, staff. I just wanted to quickly go through the site plan as well as talk about the 3 buildings that we'll be presenting here before you tonight. As I said, there's 3 buildings on this site. The first building here on Campbell Street, while it looks like 2 buildings on the site plan, actually spans over a porte cochere. So the first floor is open to allow access into our site to a roundabout. This is a 9-story building with 182 units in it. The upper corner here on the northeast side is set back to allow for potential outdoor eating areas for what we're hoping will be a first-floor restaurant on this site. The next building is what we are referring to as the Chestnut Building. This is a 4-story building with 54 units. This has a row home brownstone appearance to it, trying to take into account the single-family residences across the street on Chestnut, making a minimal impact as possible on Chestnut. The largest of the buildings is the Highland building here. Again, as Mike had iterated before, the existing Vale Street garage is right on our property line here. Being 5 stories high, that made it very difficult for us to do much of anything there other than put our parking adjacent to that. And so we have a 6-story parking garage here with access off of our roundabout right here, as well as access off of Highland right here. On top of the parking structure is, on top of the parking structure is a 6 stories of residential units, as well as a 13th amenity floor for the units, and possibly, if things work out, an additional restaurant space with fantastic views of not only Arlington Heights, but all the way to the Chicago skyline. Looking at an aerial view from the south west, this is the Chestnut Building, the 4-story building. You'll see that all 3 buildings have rooftop amenities for the residents to utilize, including grilling stations, fire pit areas, sun tanning areas, and then even the 13th floor amenity space here has outdoor terrace areas on either end. This again is the 4-story Chestnut Building. This is the most traditional of the 4 buildings. What we've tried to do is develop a sister set of 3 buildings. And in meaning there is that we've carried certain elements, whether it be stone, colors of the stone, the brick, window colors, balconies, even some of the glazing elements I'll get to here on the Highland Building are also on the Campbell Building. In order to provide a more pedestrian-friendly scale to this building, one of the things we've done is we do have our main entrance here, but for some of the first floor units, we also have little walk-up porticos along the front of the building to give it that brownstone feel that I mentioned earlier. The next building is the Campbell Building. This is a 9-story building with very traditional features that we feel extends the existing Campbell Street atmosphere. This building also, as I just mentioned, has this more modern element here, picking up some of the glass elements that we have in the Highland Building. And this is that portico share entrance off of Campbell that I mentioned earlier. We have the first floor retail that's set back in this area for some outdoor gathering areas. We have some second floor office space or potential retail space as well, and then 7 floors of residential units above that. This is the Highland Building. This is the 13-story building. Again, with the Vale Street Garage being on the property line, we had to find a place to put our entry into the Highland Building, and that's what this piece is here off of our roundabout. So this is the main entry into the parking garage for pedestrians, as well as the main entry into the residential units up above. This is the automobile access off of the roundabout. And what we tried to do with this building is each building we envisioned having a different lifestyle to it. The Chestnut Building being very traditional would be one lifestyle, very highly detailed building, interior and out. The Campbell Building would be a little less detailed, but very traditional still. And then this building we envision being more loft style on the interior with a more modern feel. Being 13 stories tall and 240 feet wide, one of the things we wanted to do was make it feel lighter, and that's why we proposed the glass shoulders on the building to give it an airiness, a little bit of a reflectiveness, to make it feel not quite as big as it might be. And then if I can go back to the site plan here. One of the other things we do have is the parking garage and Highland provides parking for not only the Highland Building, but also the Campbell Building here. And what we have is underground in the parking garage, there's a tunnel that goes beneath our drive aisle here that connects the 2 spaces, the 2 buildings together. And then lastly, we have this courtyard area here in between the Highland Building and the Chestnut Building. Initially, we had hoped this whole area to be, green space for gathering, tables, lawn area, but working with staff and the fire department, we realized that we had to provide a fire lane that comes through there. But we still have, we hope to still have some elements down here with a pergola, perhaps a little water feature or fire element there as well. And then the last piece is we do provide for a dog walking area, fenced area back here in the approximate 13 feet between the parking garage and the neighboring property. And with that, I will turn it over to Mike.
Very quickly, I wanted to point out that the entrance to the Chestnut building is off of Chestnut. Thank you. For some reason, the pointer is being stubborn. Is these two garages, for the most part, will not be connected unless, except in on rare occasions where we might have, if we ever were to have an overflow of parking, we may, and there's room in one in the Chestnut garage for maybe employees or something like that. But it's expected to be two separate parking garage for two separate buildings. With that, one of the very, very significant portions of the project is on this small of a parcel. How's this project going to actually work? Access-wise, pedestrian-wise, and at the very beginning, we decided that we needed someone with feet on the ground in Arlington Heights who manages properties downtown, who knows how things work in the downtown, what the problems are, what the issues are, and what we could do to help solve them. So Bruce, hiring what he felt was continued to be the best in class. We've hired Deb Smart from Briarwood Management, and she is going to walk through some of the logistics of the project, and hopefully this may answer some questions people might have about how things are going to work. Let me get to where you are. There you go.
Welcome, Ms. Smart.
Thank you, Mayor, trustees, staff, neighbors. It is quite unusual. In fact, this is the first time our company has ever been involved in a project this early. Usually the property management people get whatever's built and have to deal with it. So I want everyone to understand the uniqueness of us being involved in this project before the shovel's in the ground, and it is quite unique. I've been brought in to look at a couple things. One, day-to-day life within these buildings, specifically how are we going to handle the parking, and how are we going to handle the enforcement, if you so wish to discuss that. So a couple key points to start with is, one of the things we did originally was to isolate the residents' parking to be on the top 3 floors of the Highland garage. And if you remember, we'll look at the plan again, site plan in a moment, we actually have put in, at cost, a separate entrance and exit that actually goes immediately up to the 3rd floor for a fobbed access system for the residents. So they will be, as you will see, on the top 3 floors, and that's a dedicated 347 spaces for them. We also then will have an additional 160 plus spaces on the lower levels, which will be used for our guests, our employees, our office tenants, and a valet parking for the potential restaurants, and employee parking for the retail space also. So all the parking that's going to be required for this building will be contained in our structure. And we made sure that we had plenty of parking by adding that extra floor of parking at excess of $3 million. The Highland Avenue entrance and exit will be self-containing on the south side of the building, as you saw. There will be no access there to any other type of floors, and it'll be containing, coming in and off of that portico that you saw. So we're going to be able to contain our guests on those floors. We will have fobs in the garage areas for access to the building and for access to the resident floors. So there will be clearly marked signage as to where people should be parking. We also have made the commitment to have a full-time parking attendant in this garage. That is a major, major, major commitment by this project. We also will have specialized parking spots for valets. All of our employees are going to park in the garage, and there will be surveillance cameras, those ever wonderful surveillance cameras, monitoring various sections of the garage to make sure we have compliance. A couple other things about the site management I also want to bring to the table is we will be requiring through our rules and regulations the licensing of all automobiles, including village stickers, and all dogs will be required to be licensed also. We feel just by starting that off from the very beginning, it's easy to manage and it is a good process for us. We will be having very firm schedules in regards to move-outs and move-ins. We'll look at that in just a second. We will not be performing any move-in and move-outs, we believe, on Sunday unless it's emergency. And we will be putting all new tenants through a building and site orientation. So if we look at the map up here, there's a couple things to point out. If you go up in this area, you see Highland, and on Highland, we have put in a loading dock, which will have capacity for 2 trucks. That's on the very top here. That is where the move-in and move-outs will be performed, so that we will have complete off-street move-in and move-out capabilities. Also up here, you will see this area right here. This will be the exit and entrance for our residents, who then will go up the floors to our area that's dedicated for them. This is the area, as you've already heard, customers will be coming in, and we'll see the customer parking in a minute, so that they can park in the designated areas. And then we'll go over a little bit more here in a second about deliveries, but all of our deliveries will be made off-street. We will not be having any double parking of delivery trucks. Oh, let me go back here real quick. So overall parking, there's 565 spots. There's 111 more than code. We are meeting all industry standards on parking. We will have 1 full-time employee monitoring parking. We will have surveillance cameras that will be taping in regards to activity in the garage. We've done a shared parking analysis, and all of our requirements are within village code. And all accommodation based on our parking studies that we've done in the area. Now to go to the parking, we'll go through this. I've color-coded it, so it hopefully will help you. We'll go to the top, left-hand corner first, and you can see up here, we have office and retail space, and this is going to be on the ground level. So this will be the space that will help our retail and restaurant people. There also will be some shared office space, which is that multicolored area here. If you look down below, this is actually the lower level. This will be all shared parking for both office and restaurant. This is where we envision the valet parking will be going, so the valets will be down there. If we move up here to the second level, which is right here, the blue is the additional designated area for retail and for restaurant. The yellow and blue area is for resident guest and restaurant and retail. And the green starts the resident parking, which will have a gated fob right where the marker is there. So that's how people will be accessing the system. Then if you look at the next additional floors, 3 through 5, they will all be dedicated to resident parking. So that's the green there. There will be assigned spots. We will be making accommodations for folks with disabilities. We will be totally accessible for them. We are considering putting in charging stations for potential residents, and we are also looking at perhaps putting in a small zip car outlet for people who don't have cars. If we move up to the next level, the 6th level, you can see it's dedicated to all resident parking. So one of the things we've done is worked very hard on development access. So let's talk about this briefly. Up here at the top, we have full access coming into the turnabout. This is the portico here. We have a right turn only coming out. We have garage access right here. This is our residential access right here. And we also will have residential access back here. So based on the traffic studies we're going to be discussing shortly, this gets the congestion of the building that people may feel may be happening and pushing it away from the building as quickly as possible. Then if you look here at this kind of internal circulation, we have put in here, here, and here, which is Chestnut, 3 loading zones specifically for deliveries. So all the deliveries will be made off the street. We also have put in some other areas for loading in blue that you can see on here. And those are a lot for passenger type situations. So if someone wants to pick someone up, they're not double parking on the street. They'll be coming off the street to do all that. So as the density was a concern of our residents and our neighbors, we have worked very hard to move things off the street and have created designated areas. We have been in conversation with all the major delivery vendors out there. They are very excited about this. This is the first time somebody's really taken care of them, as they say, many of them. And we're pretty proud of that. So at this point in time, I'm going to turn it back over for the traffic analysis findings, and thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smart.
Thanks, Deb. Very briefly, we employed, again, best in class, KLOA traffic consultants. Louie Abuna is here with us tonight. Don't know why anybody would use anybody else. Louie really is about the best there is, and his credentials are impeccable. He has done exhaustive amount of study on the traffic, I believe with comments and requests by staff. 2 or 3 times we have enhanced the parking study and have provided a very, very significant amount of additional information. So it boils down to a few things. Due to the fact that this is a transit-oriented development, the convenience and accessibility of nearby goods and services, a lot of people are riding bicycles. I believe we're going to have an excess of 80 bicycle parking places in 2 of the buildings. The development-generated traffic can be accommodated without any significant impact to the external roadway system. In working with the staff, we've tried to disperse the traffic from as many different ways as we can without taking away any amount of significant on-street parking, which was one of the goals that the staff had, and we have worked very hard to accommodate that request. Very simply put, we are proposing, and I believe the recommendations will include, a 4-way stop at Highland and Sigwalt, and since there are only 3 corners, at Highland and Campbell, a 3-way stop there with marked and signalized crosswalks. We have done, Louie did an investigation. We have them if you want to see them. Weren't going to present it. A study of the future amount of traffic that would be anticipated to go through the intersections, similar intersections on Chestnut and Highland and Chestnut and Sigwalt, and the stop sign, always stop sign controls are not warranted at those intersections. Should the village choose to put them in, we would have no objection, but the traffic study results were pretty clear that the amount of additional traffic or traffic there would not warrant it under the traditional studies of the industry. Any more information or requests about traffic counts, anything else, Louie will be happy to address. One thing I also wanted to stress, because this came up at the Design Commission, this came up at the Plan Commission, is how sustainable is this project, and is this in keeping with trying to preserve and conserve our environment? Our goal is to make this project a LEED certified project. Very specific requirements, and our goal is to work as hard as we can to obtain that certification. As you saw from the site plan, we will have green spaces on many of the roofs. In addition, multiple trees. We have a full landscape plan should you like to see it. It was enhanced at the request of the staff and was approved at the Plan Commission. All utilities will be, most all utilities will be underground. Those that are required to be on the surface will of course be screened. We will use permeable pavers to allow infiltration and reduce runoff. We have worked with the staff, the fire safety departments, the fire department, to provide the appropriate and the right pavers in the area between the Chestnut and the Highland building that'll have a nice appearance, but will be of a level that is certified and acceptable to the fire department. One thing that Rob didn't mention and I wanted to point out is on the Highland building, we were asked to use and have implemented non-glare glass. We don't want glass, sun shining off and reflecting into other buildings in the area. And all the glass windows will have U factors in accordance with the energy code. We have been asked to remove all the PVC trim. It's all gone. All appliances will be Energy Star rated, and we intend to include charging stations for electric vehicles to charge within the garage. To the extent we can add green features to the project during the final planning and design process, we will certainly do so. With that, I think a project of this magnitude, I'm only going to spend a couple of minutes on what this project means as far as financial benefits and resources. We should make it clear that the benefits are enormous. The real estate taxes alone on this project, based on current practices, other projects around, will be in excess of $2 million per year. To date, this project generates about $30,000, this property. As you can see, one of the most significant is that the school districts will get close to $1.5 million a year, and that will of course escalate as taxes go up. I'm not convinced they're going to go down, but as taxes go up, so will those dollars. And of course, many, many other agencies, all these taxing bodies, including the village, will receive very significant benefits from this project. It's not only the real estate taxes. As you can see, over 5 years, once we're stabilized, the amount of real estate taxes over 5 and 10 years is just a huge, huge number. Staff's own report indicated that within a 3-mile radius, over $5.2 million will be generated from spending. One of the things that is very, very important to restaurant businesses, and Lord knows we have many of them in downtown Arlington Heights, are what we call daytime populations. They need lunch customers. Many restaurants can make it if they have lunch and dinner. There's not enough lunch customers. We're putting in office space. We expect that all those people will live and dine in downtown, and we're hoping many of them will even live in this project. In addition to that, the number of people who will be living at this project, I think Charles will go into that a little more because they have more detailed studies, will also contribute to the local economies. I know we have a restaurant tax, a food and beverage tax. We do and are courting at least one high-end restaurant, as we talked about with valet parking. Everybody has their opinion on what kind of restaurant we should have, but we're going to try to enhance the dining experience even more. As Bev mentioned, all the sticker fees are going to be mandatory of all our tenants for pets and for automobiles, and the list goes on. Finally, employment. Employment is a big, big deal. It is a big deal to us. We've discussed with Power Construction, 100+ construction jobs over a period of 3 to 4 years. And all those construction workers will eat around here, shop around here, and I'm sure spend a lot of after-hour time in the various establishments in the village. But once the construction is completed, we expect at least from the retail portion of this, at least 50 full-time jobs, if not more, and 75 or more part-time jobs. We are in hopes that many of these will be local folks as well. So with that, I'm sure taking this entire project as a whole, one of the very significant portions of it are the economic benefits. That concludes our presentation. We wanted to make it as brief as we could and cover as much as we could. I'm sure there will be questions. And we have John Gorman, a principal of Power Construction, Louie Abuna from KLOA, Jim Kapustiak from Spaceco. In fact, there's two of you. Mr. Bolden's here as well. Bruce, of course, and his team. Our architects are here. We are prepared to answer any questions we have. About 40 more slides behind this, if anything comes up that you need to see. So we're here to help and answer any questions you might have. We've worked extremely hard on this project in coming to agreements with staff on all, if not, in fact, all of their recommendations. And so with that, we thank you for your time, and we'll be here to answer questions.
Don't go anywhere. Mr. Frisell, a very thorough presentation, comprehensive. I think it covered many, many issues. The one that you touched on at the very end was the construction schedule. I think you mentioned 3 to 4 years. If you could just touch on that in terms of the schedule and the phasing of this project.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. The first phase will be the site development work along with the construction of the parking garage and the Highland building will start These are going to be, of course, concrete. So, John can correct me if I'm wrong, but we're going to start with the foundations and work on the parking garage. Then that can move over to the Highland building, which will also be part of the first phase. While they build on top of the parking garage, they'll be also pouring on the Highland building. Is that? The Campbell building. Is that correct? That's correct. Okay, I got the nod. So the site development work, all of it. The only thing that will not be part of the first phase will be the Chestnut building. A couple of reasons why. Number one, it's a cost. I mean, to build, those two buildings alone will have 307 units. In addition, we have not made a final decision whether or not the Chestnut building will be multifamily apartments, and if the market warrants it, could be condominium type of development. So that underground parking will be built with the Chestnut building, and the Chestnut building itself will be the next phase. Construction, start to end with everything in it, could take 18 to 20 months, and then when we build the Chestnut building, it could be another year to year and a half after that. So that's how it would work. One thing we do want to point out is that one of the reasons we put many, many more spaces into the Highland garage was because we had 2 levels of parking under the Chestnut building. Well, part of it was going to be under the roadway, or I'll call it the midway between the 2 buildings, and if we removed any portion of that to build that second level of the garage that would be closer to the Highland building, the fire trucks would not have access at that time. And there's no way you can take away that fire truck access. So we have, instead of 83 spots under the Chestnut building, there are now 58. And those additional spots, plus 22 more, were added to the Highland garage, meaning that the area between the 2 buildings will be built in phase 1 and will not be removed, and it'll be there to support fire trucks whenever needed. Okay? Does that answer your question?
Start date would be what? Start date.
Start date, I can't answer that. It depends on a lot of things. One of the least not being financing. I would venture, although I can't speak for Bruce, it would not be till next spring, I don't believe. We haven't gone any further with final plans until we know what we're building and what we're going to be allowed to build. And then we have to finance it and get our permits, go through the process. My guess is we're talking about next spring. Would you say that's accurate, Bruce? Gentlemen?
Okay,
So
great, thanks.
hopefully that answers your question.
Yes. Before I go, Mr. Eckles?
I was just going to suggest, Mayor, before we go further with questions, I may suggest that we do the staff presentation, because the staff presentation may answer some of the questions that the board may
Yeah,
have.
I agree. I just thought this was such a basic
Sure,
question that
sure.
I wanted to have the developer address it in case anyone else had that.
Thank you.
And before we go to the staff, I do see some people standing in the back. Feel free to move some of those chairs that are in the overflow area over into this room. You're welcome to do that. I don't want you standing for a couple hours. All right, unless there's a real burning question right now from the board, let's go to the staff. Mr. Perkins, can we go
Yes.
right to Charles?
Yep.
Okay, Mr. Perkins.
Good evening, everybody. This is a very important project, as the board is aware. One of the board's strategic priorities from 2017 was to facilitate redevelopment of what's known as Block 425. This is a long-awaited development proposal that the Staff Development Committee believes will further the downtown redevelopment. Many of our neighboring communities are approving developments to improve their market share. So we feel it's important that Arlington Heights thoroughly vets this particular development that will provide long-term positive economic impact for the community as a whole. We recognize it's not possible to make everybody happy with this kind of development, but we've tried our best to listen to the residents and the business community and incorporate as many changes in the plan that we can. Specifically, the developer's looking to rezone some property for particular pieces, a plan unit development, and a land use variation to allow residential as the principal use on one of the buildings on Chestnut. There are about 5 or 6 variations I'll touch upon later. These are some of the meetings that, Mayor, you referenced that this project has gone through, starting in September with the neighborhood meeting, 3 public meetings with the Design Commission when they ultimately approved the project from a design point of view with a 4-to-1 vote, 2 public hearings before the Plan Commission. The first one, staff recommended a continuance because we needed more details on the parking to be able to make a formal recommendation on the parking, and so that was continued to the April 10th, and then ultimately that was approved with a 9-0 vote. And then more recently, the Housing Commission held 2 lengthy meetings to talk about affordable housing, and then their recommendation was a 4-0 vote. So the site, as everybody's aware, is immediately west of the Vale Garage, consists of 3 buildings as have been described, so I won't go into any more details, but this kind of superimposes the site plan on an aerial, so you can kind of have some context. The downtown master plan for this northern portion of the block calls for 6 to 8 stories. So the 4-story building on Chestnut obviously is lower than this height limit and complies. The Campbell Street building at 9 stories we feel is in substantial compliance with the downtown master plan. The Highland Avenue building, obviously at 13 stories, exceeds what the master plan called for. Keep in mind this was a plan, there's a roadmap, it's not cast in stone, and not every single recommendation from the master plan has been implemented to date. This shows the current zoning. In the blue on the subject site, that's currently zone B5. The 4 lots shaded kind of this yellow, those would need to be rezoned from R3 to the B5 category. The property to the south has been part of hearings in the past and is shown on the comprehensive plan as high-density multifamily, as is the property northwest of the site on the west side of Chestnut. Also along the west side of Chestnut is single-family attached designation, which is a little more dense than how it's currently developed with single-family homes. We're not suggesting that would redevelop that way at this point, but that's just how the plan illustrates. Again, for a little more context, this illustrates the downtown. So the intent of the downtown was to have this core area that's I'm highlighting in blue be the mixed use, the higher density development, and then the master plan from 87 and again in 2007, and shown here in this 2015 comprehensive plan shows kind of a ring around the downtown that was supposed to be a lower density in the kind of an R7 type category, which would allow up to 60 feet in height. Not all of these areas or sites have developed that way, and that was a lot of discussion with the CA Ventures project about a year ago. This shows the proposed development for Arlington 425 with the current proposal that we have for the southern portion of this block, which is now being proposed as a 16-unit, 4-story row home development. So we put this in context so that everybody could see it. Also, those dimensions listed on there are dimensions from the 13-story building to the site, the edge of the site on Sigward at 150 feet, or to the front of the buildings on the west side of Chestnut at 221 feet. The same dimensions on the south from the building to lot line, just over 160 feet, and then from the building to the front of the home on the south side of Sigwald is 233 feet. Also, just as a point of reference, the space between the buildings in the courtyard is 55 feet, and in comparison, Village Green, the space between Campbell and wing buildings is about 65, 68 feet. I'll skip over the site plan that was discussed by the developer. Did just want to touch on detention. There is underground detention vault in this area, 0.9 acre feet. There are also brick permeable pavers in this area as well to help with the on-site drainage. Just want to talk through some of the variations. The first variation is a land use variation to allow dwelling units on the first floor of the Chestnut building. The B5 district requires commercial active uses on the first floor. We feel this is a very reasonable request given the proximity of the residential homes, the 4 homes on the west side of Chestnut. Variation number 2 is shown in this area. This is a setback variation. The village code now requires a 20-foot setback across from a predominantly residential area. Immediately across the street is currently zoned R6, so that's a multifamily, more moderate density. It is also shown on the comprehensive plan for high-density multifamily. So we felt the setback request of that location was appropriate. The third variation deals with a setback along Chestnut in this area. Again, the requirement is 20 feet. The request is to go down to just over 12 feet. The driving forces of that are the widening of Chestnut and the dedication of 8 feet. Also, the proximity of the Vale Garage that the village built over the street and up to the edge of the property that has kind of driven some of the site planning characteristics and the need to incorporate parking where it is. So it's not possible to shift buildings further into the site to accommodate that. The fourth variation is along the southern property line to change the setback required from 25 feet to just under 13 feet. The basis for this is to align the garage with the village's garage. Again, Staff Development Committee did support that. Last couple of variations. Item 6 is a landscaping screening requirement to provide a 6-foot solid screen between the property to the south, which has not developed yet. Staff doesn't believe a 6-foot screen would be appropriate there. We'd like to see it be a little more open. And there are some conditions in the recommendation that deal with that. And then the last variation deals with the right-of-way dedication where the Vale Avenue Garage is built. There's no point in getting the additional right-of-way dedication in this area, as the village will not expand the street in that particular area. Dedication is being provided along Highland and Chestnut in all other areas. There's about a 30-page report that does get into all the criteria and why the Staff Development Committee supported these variations, but I won't bore everybody with that. So some of the key issues are density, parking, loading, traffic obviously, design, we've heard some comments from, and also affordable housing. Looking at density, we've done a little more study on how does this development compare with other developments in the immediate downtown area. So in this chart you can see comparable developments that are shaded. So Village Green, they've got 264 units. Hancock Square has 409 units. Obviously Arlington 425 is proposed at 361. So density units per acre, the proposed projects is 131 units an acre. Metro Lofts, in comparison, was 125 units an acre, and Dunton Towers, on a smaller site, was a higher density on a per density unit per basis. We've looked at population estimates. We've heard some feedback from the community that there could be as many as 800 residents living here in this development. That's not what we're seeing in the data from the census or from our own projections. So we've looked at 1.3 persons per household and the census at 1.4 persons per household. And you can see the estimates here. Hancock Square being very comparable, between 530 and 590 compared to what's Arlington 425 at around 470 to 525. And then lastly, floor area ratio. That's the square footage of the buildings as a ratio of the land area. Pretty much all the developments downtown have a higher floor area ratio than the proposed development. This is actual census data. I won't go over. We have transposed that onto a block-by-block basis. The developments highlighted in red are blocks that are very comparable in size and density to what's proposed. So the Village Green development located here, you can see the population range and the unit range. The census data actually misses a lot of units in this area, so we feel it misses the One North Chestnut building, so we added that in. That's why it's got a range. The Arlington 425 here, you can see we took the 1.45 ratio at 523 population. And then Hancock Square, they're smaller blocks, but the two together are very comparable. So this is 409 units, so more units, and the population is more in the 530 to 590 population range. So in comparison, this is very similar to the two blocks that I've just highlighted. As far as the density from a zoning code point of view, the project meets the requirements of the B5 district. There are no variations for density. It also meets the building height requirements. The village has a 90-foot limit, allowing going up to 140 feet if they meet certain density bonuses, which this development does. Looking at height, we know there's some concerns about the proposed 13-story height, so we put the heights on a map here so that the board and public can see this. So the development is in this area. You can see the 4-story building along Chestnut. The purple is 9 stories as proposed, which is right across from 2 8-story buildings shown in this 7 8-story category range. This color here represents the 13-story building. So we have 2 other buildings that are 13 stories or greater. Dunton Towers is taller, but the same height. And Arlington Town Square, their development is a 13-story building, both at about 140 feet. These 2 buildings are closer to the residents south of Sigwart than the proposed development at this location. Parking, as the petitioner mentioned, the current requirement for this development for our code is 455 spaces. They exceed that by 110. The difference in the 1 space that the petitioner references on how you round the calculations. So just looking at the Highland garage, there are 307 units that would be parking in there, plus the residential. And using our parking code again, 395 would be required, and the Highland garage exceeds that by well over 100. But we didn't just look at the parking code. We looked at this project from ratios for residential. We looked at 1.3 spaces per unit and 1.5, as well as data from other projects. And then we looked at the ITE requirements for the restaurant, office, and retail space. And we honed in on 1.3 spaces per unit for the residential and plugged that into the formula that the petitioner's traffic consultant provided, and determined that the peak weekend occupancy, there would still be a surplus of 9 spaces, and the peak weekday there'll be a surplus of 25. So in essence, that's pretty much full, but there's not a deficit there. There would be deficits if you look at the 1.5 spaces per residential unit. So just to show how this was put together, it's a shared parking model that looks on an hour-by-hour basis for every use, using the ITE standards for the restaurant, retail, office, and then the 1.3 for residential. So this is the weekday demand. Highlighted is the peak for the commercial, and then also the peak overall demand at 8 p.m. in the evening. And then this is the same chart on the weekend, where there's a higher peak during the morning, which cannot be accommodated by this development. The maximum that could be accommodated from the commercial would be 134. There are other opportunities for the village to review this parking as well. I should point out the restaurants would need a special use approval, whether that's a waiver administratively through village staff or whether it would need to come back to the village board. So those would be vetted again, and this assumes all of those spaces being occupied as presented by the developer as restaurants and retail and office uses. So the petitioner talked about the how the parking was being accommodated. This kind of just gives you a summary chart. So there's the non-residential at 134 spaces, a combined non-residential and guest at 26, and then the designated residential only at 347. And I'm going to skip through these plans because they were already presented. At the Plan Commission, there was a lot of discussion about the off-street parking. The on-street parking. So there are about 18 spaces that will be lost on the on-street parking due to access points into and out of the site. We've worked hard to minimize this. There might be a few opportunities to reduce this loss, but any development will need access to the public street, and there will be some level of lost parking from what we have today. The loading was talked about already by the petitioner, but this exhibit does show how many loading spaces there are for this development, which is fairly unusual. Many of the older developments have to load from the street. Even the newer developments, while they do have loading areas, they're not usually as extensive of this. There's also a series of conditions on time limits and things of that nature in the recommendation that comes before you, restricting when and how those loading zones can be utilized. Talking about traffic improvements, this was touched upon briefly. So while the traffic study concluded that the street network could accommodate the projected traffic, we did hear from the residents and the neighbors in the CA Venture project and also as part of this that they were concerned about traffic flow, they were concerned about pedestrian safety. So even though some of these intersections were not illustrated as needing improvements, we have made a series of recommendations. So this shows the Campbell and Chestnut. On the left is the existing conditions. As you can see, there is an offset intersection, so it's a little more difficult to implement a true four-way stop. We are proposing that curb bump outs be built by the developer. The existing hydrant here that takes up a lot of parking spaces moving into that bump out. This shortens the path for pedestrians to cross the street and makes it a safer crossing. With respect to Campbell Highland, we're proposing a three-way intersection. The village previously approved a mid-block walkway at in front of Metropolis. We're proposing shifting that to this intersection. There's no point in having a mid-block walkway where vehicles stop and then another pedestrian crossing. Again, the bump outs in this location here help narrow the street, make it for a safer crossing for the pedestrians and also slow down traffic. And then lastly, at Sigwalt and Highland, currently it's a north-south stop only. We are recommending a full four-way stop at this location. There were some questions regarding design that have come up recently over the last week or so, so I just want to quickly summarize some of the design changes that have occurred. The Chestnut building, for everyone's reference, was originally a 5.5-story building that was reduced to 4 stories to have more of a step back adjacent to the 4 or 5 residential homes on the west side of Chestnut and those beyond in the neighborhood. It is a more traditional style character. It works well with the adjacent neighborhood, and the Design Commission, while they made a few minor changes and recommendations, they recommended approval of that architecture. The Campbell building is nicely designed. It fits with the character of downtown, very similar to the style and the types of materials that are being used or have been used in the Campbell building and the One North Highland building. The Design Commission did make a few changes to raise the stone on the from the first level into the second floor and enhance the east and west facades, and then also recommended that. The Highland building, the first 6 levels are the expansion of the Vale Garage. Well, it's a private garage, but it does match the architecture of that garage. And then on top of that is the residential building. Staff had recommended incorporating some vertical brick bands to kind of break up that glass a little bit. The design commission, 4 out of 5 members, liked the glass walls and thought it was a unique feature. They did make some changes on the glass details and also at the entrance to reduce the glass a little bit, but they also recommended that. Lastly, economics, that was talked upon a little bit by the developer. Our numbers are a little more conservative on the estimate of real estate taxes. We didn't want to overestimate, although it could be in the 1.5 to 2 million plus range. The development will also pay impact fees. These are cash impact fees at the time of building permit if it's approved, and they go directly to the schools, the parks, the library, and the 2 different school districts. Also, the spending stimulus within a 3-mile radius, which based on standards from CoStar, which is a online system that we subscribe to. This is a lower estimate. It probably will be higher than that, but this is the CoStar standard that's used. So it will generate significantly over $5 million in spend within a 3-mile radius, mostly within Arlington Heights businesses. There have been some questions on school enrollment. So we have formulas that we've worked with the school district and they're comfortable with. Taking those formulas would be a total of 32 children in the development. However, when looking at other developments such as Dunton Towers and Hancock Square, the actual projection from that formula is not what the children or students are from that development. So it's about 1/3 of what's projected. So we don't envision it would be anywhere near 32 children that would be in the school district. But the schools would benefit from the significant property tax increase. And then lastly, the Housing Commission and the affordable housing requirements. The Housing Commission last Monday did make a recommendation to accept staff's recommendation on affordable housing with a modification that they stated a preference for the additional 9 units to be provided at 80% of area median income, with no cash in lieu of the requirement. Staff had recommended 18 affordable units being provided at 60% AMI, which is 5% of the units. And we had recommended an additional 9 units, which is 2.5% of the total project, pay a fee in lieu of into the Village's Affordable Housing Trust Fund at $25,000 per unit for a total of $225,000. There are other stipulations here. Most important that I want to point out, we've requested a preference in tenancy for Arlington Heights residents, employees of Arlington Heights businesses or organizations, and or veterans. I'll be happy to answer any questions on the rest of these. And then there are also 32 conditions that staff had recommended and the Plan Commission recommended. And again, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have on those. Thank you.
Charles, if you could just go over the affordable housing guidelines within the Village of Arlington Heights and where we sit with respect to any requirements that have been imposed or suggested for us as a community.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So the state of Illinois in 2003 passed an Affordable Housing Act that requires communities to maintain 10% of their unit mix as affordable. They calculate that percentage every 5 or 6 years. The Village's last calculation was 19.1%, meets the way they calculate it. That doesn't mean that 19.1% of people living in those units meet these income guidelines. They could be making more and just be renting or purchasing, below what they could afford. There are also some data out there that there's about 1,700 families that are still paying more than 30% of their income on housing.
Okay, Mr. Eckles, did you have something to
Just in general, about a couple of non-affordable housing issues, if that's all right.
Sure.
I want to address a couple of issues that had come up from questions from residents and trustees over the last couple of days, just to highlight things. Talking about utilities. Stormwater management's obviously a major goal and a major focus of the village right now. And there were some concerns addressed, some concerns that were expressed about whether or not this project's going to exacerbate any existing stormwater problem. And a couple of things I want to point out. Number one, we pointed out that this is going to have underground stormwater storage to the tune of 0.9 acre feet. Well, what is 0.9 acre feet? Well, we did the calculation today, and it's about 40,000 cubic feet of storage. So it's quite a bit of storage that we're talking about. But beyond that, the village is currently conducting a project. We're getting started over the next couple of weeks here on a $3.5 million stormwater improvement project in this area, for which we got a $1.8 million grant. And we're putting in stormwater lines throughout the whole downtown that will service not just downtown, but the area to the west and south of downtown, the single-family homes. And all of the sewer lines are going up. Either they're going up by an order of magnitude. They're doubling to going up 5.5 times in size. So this is a tremendous improvement where these lines are at a minimum doubling in size, but in some cases going up 5 times in diameter. So stormwater, we're very confident that our system is going to be able to handle this, especially with the addition of the underground storage that they're putting into effect. On the electric side, we have met with ComEd. ComEd was made aware of this project very early in the process, and they're comfortable that the existing grid can handle this development the way it's configured based on what is proposed. In terms of fire and police, there were concerns about our ability to handle the call volume. As you know, all of us know, we're fortunate enough to be a very large community with a lot of resources. This increase in population represents a little bit more than a 0.5% increase in our population. So this is not something that is going to dramatically increase our calls for service for fire police based on their own projections. So we don't anticipate any changes or any necessary changes in beat structures or how we're manning our fire stations in any way whatsoever as a result of this project. And one last point on this, or a couple last points here, I'm sorry. In terms of traffic, while we certainly want to make sure we have all our ducks in a row for building design and those types of issues before we issue an approval, when we talk about stop signs and we talk about their placement, that's something that the village obviously is completely in control of. And if we find after the first phase of this project that traffic is worse than our projections, we can always reevaluate where we put those stop signs and whether we need more, whether we need to do additional traffic control. And that's something that we're in complete control over, and we can do at any point in the future past the approval of this project. Lastly, I want to make one point about the downtown master plan, because some folks have pointed out that these buildings are, in some cases, are taller than what was recommended as part of the downtown master plan. The downtown master plan suggests that 8 stories is appropriate in this area. And while these buildings do not exceed the village's building height requirements, the actual code, two of the buildings are slightly higher than what is recommended in the downtown master plan. However, it's important to note that if you were to follow the downtown master plan recommendations, all 3 of these buildings could be 8 stories. And we didn't think that was appropriate because of the adjacency of single-family homes. And so what essentially happens is the Chestnut building went down to 4 stories, and the other buildings went up as a bit of a trade-off. And so we feel that it's in character with what was recommended, along with being sensitive to the adjacent properties. The other thing to take in consideration is, as was pointed out by the petitioner, this project contains over 100 extra spaces beyond what is required by our code. That takes up space, and that adds height to the project. And that's something that needs to be considered as well. The village board was very clear very early in this process that they did not want this project to place an undue burden on our parking system. And that's one of the reasons staff really stressed that issue, and one of the reasons that the petitioner responded by going above and beyond the code with this proposal. So those are the points I just wanted to stress a little bit further, because I know they're points of interest for the board.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ecklas. All All right, are there any questions from the board now at this point, primarily to seek clarification on what's been presented either by the developer or the staff before we go to the board, or before we go to the audience? All right, seeing none, I'll go to the audience then, and we do have a number of blue cards. Again, you're reminded of the 3-minute time limit. I'm going to call the first individual and give the name of the individual who's on deck. So if the person on deck would get ready to go so that we could keep the process moving, we'd all appreciate it. So the first is Arlen Gould. And on deck is Carrie Dwyer.
Mayor, board, staff, pleasure to be here. In the 30-some-odd years that I've been involved in Arlington Heights, and now on my third home, I think I've only spoken to the board twice. And this is the second time. And it's because I believe that this project is so important to the village of Arlington Heights. For a whole host of reasons, most of which you've already heard, but just a couple of highlights from my perspective. One, it's a major addition to our exciting downtown. When my wife and I sold our last house and decided to downsize, she made it very clear that we were not leaving Arlington Heights. We could have found another house in another community, but she absolutely loves the downtown, what you all over the last 20-some-odd years have done with our community and made it a really shining star in the northwest suburbs. Secondly, there's no TIF in this project, which means the community is not being denied money. Rather, the school district, and I'm on a school district board, so we don't benefit from this, but one of our school districts is going to benefit greatly from the revenues created by this, as will the village. Parking has been addressed for the last number of years. You've all talked about the need for additional parking in the downtown area to accommodate growth, and with this project, you will have 113 or 112 additional parking spaces. Most of all, I think that it adds to the excitement in downtown Arlington. The Metropolis, Hainoni, our restaurants, the pizzazz that Arlington Heights has, I hear from friends of mine from all over the northwest suburbs, and this continues that trend. My fear is, frankly, that if we don't say yes tonight to what I think is maybe not a perfect project, but a very, very good project for the village. There's going to be a recession in the next few years, I'm pretty sure, for a host of reasons. And if and when that happens, it means that this project and the development for downtown will probably be delayed quite a long time. So I'm not telling you how to vote. I would not do that. I'm just sharing my positive views of this project, and I want to thank the board for everything you've done for our community. I want to welcome our two new board members, Tom and Mary Beth, and John Scaletta coming back for more service. But thank you very much for your service, and I appreciate your time and energy for the village of Arlington Heights.
Thank you, Mr. Gould. Next is Carrie Dwyer, and then on deck is John Riddler.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for giving me some time. In 2011, my husband and I purchased our home at 30 South Chestnut Avenue. Our property resides directly across the street from the proposed development. Prior to purchasing our home, similar to others, we did our own due diligence. We researched the schools, the community safety, and we also inquired about the empty lot that's across the street from our home. And when we did, and when we talked to the city, they said that the comprehensive plan suggests that that lot would be built with 6 to 8 stories tall of buildings. And that if and when a proposal was to be presented, the city would use the comprehensive plan as their guide to make the right decision. We are all aware that the current proposal is a series of 3 buildings, the tallest being 13 stories in height. I understand that all proposals could and should be considered, but it is still my hope that the city and the board will use the comprehensive plan to make their final decision. It is my understanding that the comprehensive plan was developed to protect the residents at the risk of our homes depreciating in value by placing a building that is too large in density in proximity to single-family homes. It is also my understanding that it is the responsibility of the Design and Plan Commission to review the harmonious and compatibility of a proposed development. However, I have not seen in any previous meetings where this has been discussed. However, I have seen that it has actually been deferred to the next recommending body and is ultimately being resided with the board this evening to review. I want to be clear, I am 100% in favor of building across the street from my home. My sole concern is the density of this project and the safety of the community. Several of the community members have joined together to ask other residents just that. Would this development at this density be the appropriate fit? I am pleased to say that we are not alone. We have obtained over 300 signatures in opposition of the current proposal. Again, of the current proposal, not building across the street, but the current design. There's concerns around safety of our pedestrians. I understand that we say that it doesn't make sense to maybe put a controlled intersection at Chestnut and Campbell, and that we can address that later. However, right now, I can't cross the street with my children without the fear of getting hit by a vehicle. So I wonder, by adding 600 additional cars, how could it possibly get safer? Our schools, I know that that was addressed and that it shouldn't be a concern because the proposed development says that the units will either be a studio or one bedroom. However, once this is proved, could that not change? Couldn't the developer come back and say it's more economical to build multifamily dwellings and that those children would then reside in our schools? As we all know, the developer's proposal is based on simple economics. You maximize the space, it's a greater return. I guess my question is to the city, is it more important to drive a large financial return to a developer or to listen to its constituents when they're asking you to stay true to the tenets in which the city was built upon, and that to stay true to the guide that was prepared in order to help make those decisions? Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Dwyer. Next is John Riddler, and then on deck is Ted Eckhart.
Thank you, President Hayes and village trustees, for this opportunity to speak to you this morning, or this evening. My name is John Riddler, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Arlington Heights Chamber of Commerce, and I'm also a resident here. Joining me from the Chamber is our Chamber Board Chairman, David Jaffe, who's also a resident of Arlington Heights. On behalf of the Arlington Heights Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors and the newly rejuvenated Downtown Business Committee, I am here to encourage you to vote in support of the Arlington 25 project. For the record, the developer, CCH, is not a chamber member, but the architect is. But as we started looking at this process, we realized that the mission of the Arlington Heights Chamber is not just for chamber members, but it's for the entire business community of Arlington Heights. In our economy, each business can be affected by the other, positively or negatively. We have an open market system, and one that supports the greater good, the forward development of our community. The Arlington Heights 25 project provides that greater good for both existing and future residents and existing and future businesses. People are consumers. The more consumers you have that support businesses, the greater that business community can grow. People are also volunteers. The more residents you have that support the arts, organizations, and culture, that's the opportunities to continue to increase how great our village can become. We are aware that there are residents who oppose this project, but we also are aware that there are many residents who have been appointed to the commissions that have looked at this for a very long time have voted to bring this before you with their full support as well. We also are aware that there are people that are in opposition to this project because they feel that there should be more affordable housing with the affordable housing strategy. To put that in perspective, one thing that we look at is when a restaurant comes to town, the village does not require them to provide a 40% discount to people in a low-income situation. Nor do they do that for a dentist, nor do they do that for a auto service company or a hair salon. But the developer tonight has agreed to 18 units under the affordable housing strategy with no government funding, no TIF funds, no state or federal subsidies. So we ask the question, why would they do this? I think the reason why is because they negotiated in good faith with the village staff, and they want to be good neighbors, and they want to be great investors in our community. Please send the message to Arlington 425 and to future developers that are looking at our community and want to invest by supporting this project tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Riddler. Next is Ted Eckhart, and on deck is Lori Harp.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Village Board, staff, and friends and neighbors. I'm an architect. I've been sitting on the Design Commission now for a very long time. I've reviewed the other 13-story building in town and other larger buildings in town, and this is my first visit to ever testify in support of one of our projects. I think that it's important for the board to know that the design process was completely studied. We treated each building as a separate building and then as a neighbor. The materials were considered and are noble and sustainable. The site planning was thoughtful. The 3 different heights we felt were appropriate, although our committee is in the look-good business, not like the Plan Commission. We don't judge on heights. But the street from the skyscape, it's going to stand off very well. I completely support it as an individual and a neighbor. I also think it's very important for the viability of our downtown. It's terrific, and we need this project to keep it that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eckhart. Next is Lori Harp, and on deck is Jerry Wasserman.
Good evening.
Come, Lori.
Just so all of you remember, I live in Village Green. So I live in the project across the street and am one of the downtown residents. I just want to remind all of you what Arlington Heights looked like in 1980. We had a few mom and pop stores. The Five and Dime had closed. We had a few old seedy bars, a camera shop, a couple of jewelry stores, banks, a dated restaurant selling pies from a spinning wheel in the window, Hagenbrings, which sold buttons, yard goods, and clothing. The Daily Herald was at home in cobbled one-story buildings on Block 425. And there were no cars parked on Vale and Campbell after 5 because everybody closed down. That was Arlington Heights until a downtown plan was created, a TIF district, and a developer came with a plan. There was anxiety and there was fear, and the shadow project was created. The individual residents in that project said that this would be the end of downtown. The cloud of the project would be the doom. A strong and progressive board at the time saw a very different village, a very different vision for that village. They saw residents living in a downtown environment, shopping in a downtown environment, and enjoying an urban downtown environment. That has all come to fruition. I live it every day. One of the original members of that shadow project has come back and said she was wrong. The downtown Arlington Heights is fabulous. It is fabulous, but it's not complete. While we've enjoyed 20 years of downtown growth and development, we need to continue to grow and put people in our downtown. People who can shop our businesses, dine in our restaurants, walk to theaters, libraries, and parks. A vacant lot does not support our businesses. A vacant lot does not increase our tax base. A vacant lot gives the town a feeling of incompleteness, unless that's where you walk your dog, and that provision is not the responsibility of this landowner. I agree that there definitely needs to be a certain mix and a careful balance of affordable housing. I've spoke to that before. But should not be on this developer to pick up the lack of affordable housing that has gone before. He's doing, I think, a wonderful job of offering the 18 units and the 9. I've attended almost all of the buildings regarding this project. I've listened to the resident concerns. As I live downtown, I hear the concerns of my neighbors. These plans have been modified several times. The biggest concerns I have heard were parking, traffic, and the deliveries. And I believe all of these have been thoughtfully addressed. We need this project, and while no project is ever perfect, I believe the developer has tried and worked very hard with staff, with the village board, with the neighbors to accomplish just that. We're fortunate to have a developer willing to grow and work in our community, and I hope that you will be the board that's progressive and insightful in 2019 to support this project for the continued growth and vitality in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Harp. Next is Jerry Wasserman, and on deck is Joanne Gunderson.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for letting me be here tonight. I'm here as a member of Reclaim Northwest Suburbs to discuss the affordable housing portion of this development. There is a need for 27 affordable units in the Arlington 425. There's a great need in the community. Local agencies say the waiting list for affordable housing in Arlington Heights alone is in the thousands. Your own Housing Commission has recommended that 9 units, in addition to the already decided 18, should be made affordable, and this in place of accepting fees in lieu. Communities are getting away from accepting fees in lieu in place of affordable units, realizing that there is a need for affordable housing. We would like to see the Housing Committee recommendation voted on tonight, put on the floor and voted on. We feel the board should follow the Housing Commission's recommendations. The Commission's task was to research this issue and come to a conclusion based on their research. The committee's decision after 2 exhaustive 3-hour meetings was to put forth this recommendation. It is a fair and reasonable recommendation. What is the point of having a Housing Commission if the research is not taken seriously? The Arlington Heights policy is that 15% of the units in new developments of this size should be made affordable. The 27 units still is below 10%, where the state and many suburbs policies are at for private developments, not just publicly funded developments, but private developments. Because the staff hasn't followed their own policy in the past, is no reason a new precedent should not be set now. Also, because although this is a privately funded development and is not government subsidized, communities such as Highland Park, as part of their policy, demand that 10% of the units are affordable. At least with 27 affordable units, it brings us closer to this goal. I don't believe the developer will walk away from this project as many others agree with me. They've invested much time and money already. Their loss of 2.2 of gross rental income in a year is minuscule in comparison to the profits they'll make. The total estimated rent alone for the development annually is $8,458,200, and the developer will save the amount paid as fees in lieu. This is a small price for the amount of lives that will be helped. Since as part of this plan, preference goes to Arlington Heights residents, veterans, and employees of businesses and organizations, think of all the neighbors that you will be helping. I think there's also sometimes a misconception that because we push for affordable housing, that we are anti-business or anti-development. That is definitely not the case. This looks like a wonderful project. We just want a fair amount of affordable housing included in this project as per the Arlington Heights policy, as per the state requests, and to help Arlington Heights residents who are in need of affordable housing. In closing, please bring the Housing Committee's recommendation for 27 affordable units in the Arlington 425 to the floor for a vote tonight. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Wasserman. Next is Joanne Gunderson, and then on deck is Dolores George. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak. I live in the Metro Lofts condo building, and I'm the president of the Metro Lofts Condo Association. Grew up in Arlington Heights and came back here 14 years ago. And I remember when the downtown was, like Lori Harp explained, wasn't such a great place as it is now, and now it's really become a destination place that has vibrancy and electricity at night. I mean, it's just a wonderful place to be. I'm sure that every apartment and condo building in this town has had resistance when it came up before the board, and this one's no different. And I know change is difficult, and it's difficult to experience. But I think that the growth that has happened with all the condo buildings and the apartment buildings that have come have made Arlington Heights the town that it is, and the place that every other town tries to emulate and be like. So I think that this project is the kind of the bookend of the master plan, the bookend of the downtown, and the capstone of the master plan as it was designed, and I really hope that you vote for it. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Next is Dolores George, and then Dawn Frenzel.
Hi.
Welcome.
My name is Dolores George, and I want to thank you, the village trustees, for taking your time to dedicate your time and energy to our town, as well as to being the voice of the residents. I request the trustees vote no for the proposed Project 425. I'm not asking you to not develop that. I'm just asking you to pause and modify it to better align with the master plan. Block 425 proposed development may live into the letter of the law, but does it really live into the spirit of the law? The master plan suggests Block 425 be a transition block with 6 to 8 story buildings, not a 13-story glass building. Is it really compatible and harmonious with the vintage and brick homes in the neighborhood? I actually don't even live in the neighborhood. I live kind of closer to Westgate, but I use the downtown all the time. In addition, I'm concerned about the density issue, the safety with vehicles and pedestrians. 500 plus people, 500 plus cars. It's not just retained inside that building, it's going to be in all of downtown. That's a lot of people and a lot of cars. In addition to that, if we allow this 13-story glass building to go up, will that set a precedent for the next unit? Whether that's going to be the unit on Sigwald, whether that's going to be the unit that might be next to where the AT&T building is. Consider what you're doing today and how it will really impact us in the long term for what you're saying. If you veer from that master plan of 6 to 8 stories, which is really done well, we have a wonderful community downtown, and it's because we've followed the master plan. Once again, I ask the village board to vote no and relook at this project overall. We want to make sure it's smart for the betterment of downtown and the Arlington Heights community and residents, aligning with the long-term master plan.
Thank you, Ms. George.
Thank you.
Next is Dawn Frenzel, and then Jerry King.
Good evening, everybody. I'm here to speak as a strong proponent of affordable housing. And I ask the board to consider the Housing Commission's recommendation of 18 units at 60% and 9 units at 80% without the fee in lieu buyout. I feel the brick and mortar is always more beneficial in the need of affordable housing than the buyout. The developer isn't going to write one big check for $225,000. It's going to trickle in very slowly over many years, and it's going to lose the impact that would benefit those in need. The units is what is truly needed. This is about people who are already living in our community. This is about seniors who have raised their families. They've outlived their retirement. They've been good stewards to our community, and now they no longer can afford their homes. This is about people with disabilities that may need help bridging the gap, and they deserve dignity, and they deserve a chance at living independently in the community that they know and love. It's about young families starting out and want to raise their children in a community that's an abundance of opportunities. None of these people take from our community, but rather I believe they enrich it. I mean, who in this room can really say that they're immune to ever needing a helping hand? A set of downturns, a bad twist of fate, a string of misfortune could lead anybody into uncharted waters. Losing a job, economic downturn, an illness, an untimely death of a spouse, so much more can lead to financial hardship. Would our city of good neighbors be there? I hope so. There's no doubt we have an affordable housing crisis in this country. And with that being said, I certainly don't think that Mr. Adriani and Arlington Heights should be their sole responsibility. But can't we put a dent, a small dent in this crisis and be part of the solution? Going forward, I hope the board will craft some specific ordinances that address affordable housing that reflect integrity and values of our community instead of the wishy-washy guidelines that are in place now, which are confusing. They're confusing for the developer. I think this project is an excellent one. I think it will answer, will bring in revenue, it will bring in jobs. The construction crew will use the restaurants for lunch. I mean, I think business-wise, it's a great opportunity, but I also think that we could do a little bit better for affordable housing. I really do. I think the fee in lieu is not going to help as much as the brick and mortar. I think the 9 more units at 80% is a little bit more to ask. And I wish you take that into consideration, take the Housing Commission's recommendations and ask the developer to maybe dig a little bit deeper. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Frenzel. And last blue card I have is Jerry King.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and trustees and staff and the developer. I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. A lot of what I wanted to say really has been covered, but I guess I just have to say that when my wife and I moved here about 10 years ago, we looked at the master plan and we were excited by it. And we continue to be. We think this project is wonderful. We hope that you will vote affirmatively for it. I've been through a lot of the conversations here, and when I think about the developer's task, it seems like the entire process from the developer's standpoint had to be kind of like trying to grab Jell-O with your bare hands. Because the proposed design overcomes many competing constraints. You have urban to the north, urban to the east, houses to the west. You have the village wanting more parking. You have the village parking garage built right to the property line. A lot of constraints. If you're looking for perfection here, I'm afraid that you probably will never do anything with this property. And that would just be an absolute tragedy for the village. So I'm very hopeful that you will vote affirmatively. I must say that when I came here this evening, I had no intention of saying anything about affordable housing because frankly, it's an issue I don't know a lot about. But that said, personally, as somebody who thinks economically, when you tax something, you get less of it. That's just an economic reality. And whether you want to call this a tax or not, an affordable housing mandate is a tax. It is a tax, and you will end up with less apartments, with less development as a result of it. If we as a community really think that we need to be behind affordable housing, we as a community need to provide those funds. So perhaps what we need to do is put it to the residents to see if that's what the residents actually want. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. King. I have no other blue cards, but I do want to give the opportunity for anyone else who wishes to address the board to come at this time. Is there anyone else who would like to address the board at this time? If you'd come forward, if you would, and just give us your name.
My name is Robert. I'm a 13-year.
Robert, you got to give us your last name.
Robert Schmidt. I'm a 13-year resident, and I would like to say thank you for allowing me to speak. One of my concerns was I was looking at the map that you had for the trucks. I was noticing the red squares and where exactly like the cabs of the trucks would be sticking out onto the street, because I don't want anything to end up happening like for the dock at Jewel, where the truck sticks out and blocks the road, and you have to swerve around it basically to get around, and sometimes you're waiting for other traffic the other way. But basically what I'm saying is I want a constant flow of traffic. And then my other concern is the height of the building as well. And I feel like the guidelines should be followed for that as well. And I just would like to say that I'm not against a project at all. I feel like our community needs something other than just a doggy park. And the other thing that I really like are the green amenities that he's adding to the design aspect of it as well. So those are just a few of the things that I wanted to say. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Schmidt. Anybody else in the audience wish to address the board on this? Just your name, if you would, Ms. Royal.
Good evening. My name is Judith Royal. I live in Arlington Heights. I would really like to see you accept the recommendation made by the Housing Commission. I would like to see this project, if it were to be built, to have 27 units of affordable housing rather than any money in lieu. I think affordable housing is needed in this community for public servants such as school teachers, EMT drivers, ambulance drivers, firefighters, veterans. And I think this is a good time to make units available for them. Let's not overlook the fact that sometimes when we give people housing in slightly better circumstances, we help them raise their boat. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Ryle. Anybody else? All right, seeing none, then we'll come back to the board. I just want to thank you for your observance of the proprieties. I very much appreciate that. We've come to the point in the meeting where it's already 9 o'clock, but I think we've got a good base for which to begin our deliberations. Let me just say a couple of things before I turn it over to the board. With respect to the Housing Commission, what happened there, with all due respect to them, as a lawyer myself, I'm still trying to figure out exactly what they recommended. Just verbatim from looking at the minutes, they accepted the staff recommendation, but they gave a preference for more units. So I would prefer to have more units as well. I think we all would, all in this room would prefer to have more affordable housing units. But the developer, through the process of very hard negotiations, has come forward with, I think, a reasonable proposal and concurred with the staff recommendation. And so I don't think it's our job to put the entire burden of affordable housing on this developer. And so I'm satisfied with the acceptance of the staff recommendation by the Housing Commission, which they accepted, and the concurrence with the staff recommendation. The other thing I'd like to say is, and some of the audience members already stole my thunder, but I've already mentioned the people who sat in these seats before us in terms of establishing our reputation and what Arlington Heights is all about. And as has already been said, we wouldn't have the community we have and the downtown we have and the reputation we have without the vision and forethought of many people who came before us sitting up here. And so it took political courage. There was opposition to these new developments, as was said. Back in 1984, when Dunton Tower went up, the first high-rise development in downtown Arlington Heights, opposition to that. And then 85, Hancock Square, 93, Arlington Town Square, and 95, 2001, North Vale, 98, Metropolis Condominiums, and then the Village Green development in 97 to 2001. So it takes some courage to make these decisions to sit up here. But it's really incumbent upon us, I think, to fulfill the vision of the people who came before us, even in the face of opposition sometimes and in losing votes. Sometimes you have to make decisions that you think are in the best interests of this community, regardless of the political consequences. And I think the vote this evening is another one of those situations. And so with that, I will turn it over to my colleagues and see what they have to say. Who wants to go first? Trustee Canty.
So I want to appreciate all of you for the work that you've put in, attending all these meetings. Staff, you've done a tremendous job. The developer has done a lot of work to come together. I do have some questions, some things that I want to make sure. I appreciate, Randy, what you said, that we're going to be you've been in contact with ComEd about the power grid. I think some residents have raised concerns that the development itself would be fine, but they would continue to experience issues. And so I don't think that's the responsibility of the developer here, but if we can just continue to kind of force our hand a little bit with ComEd as much as we can to work in parallel. If this were to go forward, everything's going to be torn up anyway. It's a perfect opportunity. If ComEd does have some work that they might want to do, perhaps we can encourage them to try and do that at the same time or consider it. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was the affordable housing. I think many of you know this is an issue that is incredibly important to me. My mother she needed some housing help when she had my sister. I have a sister who's much older than I am. And so I want to make sure that we create those opportunities. I do think, I agree with the mayor, it's a little bit confusing what came back from the Housing Commission in terms of a recommendation and a preference. I have to be able to sleep at night after this vote. I think this is a great development. I think it could do wonderful things, not just for the downtown, but for the entire village. But again, I have to sleep at night, and I have a conscience, so I have to look at myself every day in the mirror. So I have to know that I've done everything that I can. So I do want to toss something out. I know that parking is going to be paid for by each individual resident, and my understanding is that it is not included in the calculation of affordable housing. And I'm wondering if the developer would be open for the 18 affordable units, if you would be open to the possibility of including one parking space for those residents who need affordable housing, where the additional cost of $100 or $150 a month for parking might be prohibitive.
Yes, I appreciate your comments, and first of all, I should have said at the beginning, congratulations to the new trustees. I'm sure you'll do a fine job. In fact, I know you will. One of the issues with regard to this project is the enormous cost of this parking garage. It is the parking garage alone, not including the $750,000 additional foundation cost, is in excess of $15 million. As I indicated, the additional parking accounts for in excess of $3 million of that. That being said, we have to include revenue from the parking in the income stream for the project in order to be able to build it. Someone mentioned, yes, there are $8.4 million in income. However, if you do simple math, and I have a chart and we don't need to go into it, if you borrow $120 million to pay for it at 5% interest only, and then you pay $2 million in taxes, and you pay maintenance and upkeep, it's well in excess of that number. That being said, I've discussed with Mr. Adriani a concession as it relates to the parking. And Mr. Adriani said that for up to 18 units, we would give those living in affordable housing units, we would charge them 60%, just like on the 60% of affordable housing, of what the normal parking rates would be. That will not cover the cost. It'll be an additional amount that we would have to be giving, but we think you're right. We think that to have someone pay $900 a unit and then have to pay $120 a month for parking it kind of defeats the purpose. So what we would be willing to do would give a significant discount of, let me rephrase it, no less than a 40% reduction in whatever the parking fee is. If it's feasible to do more, we would have the option to do that. So therefore, we'll meet what we feel is more than halfway, and we will give a reduction in that amount. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for responding to that so quickly. I appreciate you guys being prepared. I've done a lot of work, a lot of research. I think most of the members of the board have, so I appreciate your willingness to come back and forth on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Who's next?
I'm ready to go. I got a long list.
All right, Trustee Scaletta.
All right. So obviously, this is the largest development that the Village of Arlington Heights has entertained in the past 20 years. And we need to keep our downtown vibrant. So while I am supportive of the overall development, I have many questions that I would like to have addressed by staff and also the developer. while I appreciate the fact that we have a traffic study, and while I appreciate the fact that staff is going to continue to evaluate the traffic flow in the downtown that would also potentially run into the neighborhood, I'd really like us to be a little bit more proactive in coming up with a traffic plan instead of reacting to the traffic. I understand that this isn't going to be part of our overall approval, but it's one of the many issues that have been brought up by the neighbors in the community. And while I can't agree with every request that that the neighborhood has, I think that the ones that are key to they're having some kind of harmony in their lives is going to be important to their acceptance of the overall development. You know, there was a lot of concern about parking, and I think that some of that has been resolved with the additional parking that the developer has proposed. But I have some questions to better understand how this parking is going to work, because just because there's spaces doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be utilized in the way that is envisioned today. So let me ask you a couple of questions regarding the parking. You know, how do you monitor and enforce employees parking in the garage and nowhere else?
It will be, first of all, we can't monitor where every employee parks. We intend to make it a part of every lease that they will require their employees to park in the garage. The rates, we don't know whether or not what the leases negotiated will include, but it is going to be a development requirement that their employees park in this garage. All the employees' cars will be stickered, and they will be watched, and it would be a breach of the lease if they didn't park in the garage. Would be virtually impossible to tail or put a GPS on a car to make sure they're parked there. We intend to make the rates for the parking attractive in the event that the landlord is going to be charged with paying for the parking. So we have every reason to believe that they're not going to park any cheaper anywhere else. You have 2-hour parking on the streets. I'm sure that is enforced, so if an employee comes in and exceeds that and parks on the street, I'm sure the police will deal with it appropriately.
Okay, I know you can go on forever, but let me kind of follow up
Sure,
with this.
of course.
So you have to find some way that you include it into their rent or their CAM or something. You know, having an additional fee, all it does is encourage them to not enforce the policy. So you need to find a way that you include it in your rent or you include it in your CAM, because if I'm a guy who's got, 10 employees and it's not included in what I'm already paying, I'm not so sure that I need to make sure that he's parking where he's supposed to park and she's parking where she's supposed to park. And when you say that they'd be in violation of their lease, we both know that you're not going to find someone in default for that kind of violation. So I think that you have to find a way that when you're writing your leases that there is some kind of ramification, but you also need to find a way to include it either in your rent or in your CAM, because otherwise you're not going to find participation. And the whole goal is for participation. The whole goal is for you to park. You're building this garage that is going to be significant in size and cost. So you want people to park there anyway.
That's correct.
Okay, so I would encourage you to take all of my comments.
We will absolutely do that. The goal is, it was made clear to us from the beginning, and we agree that we do not, our goal has been to lessen any congestion in the existing village parking decks or any of the existing village parking. That's why we're building a very significant amount. And if it goes unused, shame on us, because we have to make sure we can cover the cost of that garage. So in the leases, we will either be charging, we'll find out how many full-time employees they have, and say you're going to pay X amount for use of the garage, but we can't afford to give these users the spaces away. And we want to make sure they park in this garage. One of the issues, I think it was one of the recommendations, and perhaps Charles can clarify it, is that there wouldn't be a charge. We would not be charging any less, is that correct, than the, which one is it, Charles?
Either we need bigger monitors or bigger fonts, because I honestly, I can't really get into this. Charles.
Employee parking rates shall not exceed employee parking rates set by the village for the Vale Avenue garage. We've agreed to that.
Okay. I thought we had a conversation, and I asked, I mean, you can do what you want. It's your project. I just think that if you start to charge per employee with your tenant, that you're not going to find compliance, and there's going to be problems.
I think you're probably right.
All right.
There's no question about that.
So I will leave it at that. So if I am there at your restaurant and I enjoy dinner and I've parked inside the garage, when I'm finished with dinner, how long do I have to be on your property or in the downtown before I'm in violation of your garage or my validation? How is that going to work?
Okay, good question. And Deb, would you come up and correct me in case I get this wrong? Okay. When you, and first of all, as was stated, the only entrance to non-residents will be through the roundabout into the Highland garage. There will be a gate. People will take a ticket when they enter that. That ticket will come with a parking fee unless you have a stamp from a retailer, or if you work in an office, from your employer, or if you are the office, you will have to work on paying for a coupon that will get you out, like many, many businesses do. If you shop in our store, we'll give you a sticker, and you present that sticker, and away you go at no charge. If we are not going to have someone stand at the gate or the entrance and say, where are you going? Because if you're not going to one of these businesses in Arlington 425, you can't park here. That is not the plan. The plan is if someone comes in, they're going to pay a rate that will be higher than other rates within the village if they're not going to a business where they can get the stamp, which will not have a time limit, so I understand it. They will not have a time limit, so someone going to eat at a restaurant, if they want to go to the restaurant and go to the movie afterwards and come back 2.5, 3 hours later, they're not paying for that parking. So to the extent that when we say this is private parking, it is not completely private. If someone from the outside wants to park there, they can, but they will know before they enter that it will be more money than anywhere else where they're going to park unless they get a stamped ticket from one of the businesses.
And the validation is free?
Yes. Well, it'll either be free or paid for by the restaurant.
Or the business?
Or the business, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So there will, so if they, as long as they patronize one of the businesses there and they get a validation, there will be no charge for parking?
That's correct.
Okay.
And that's in the recommendations as well.
Okay. And can a business charge them for parking?
I guess, well, it depends. Can a business charge an employee? I guess they can. Can a business charge a office, someone who rents an office You're going to pay me so much in rent, but if you have a car and you want to park in the garage, you have to pay so much for the sticker on a daily basis or a monthly basis. The answer would be yes. Can a business charge an employee? Can a business charge a customer to park their car? The answer, I can't control what the business does.
Sure you can through the lease.
We're not even that far, and the answer is.
I understand you're asking for approval though, right? So you have to get that far. So that's why I'm bringing up all these questions now, because these are all issues that are going to be important to the success of your development. I mean, if I don't understand it and people are asking me, and I'm voting on it. So that's why I'm asking you.
I think the plan is that with the valet parking, as with some other places downtown, the market's gonna drive that. So we have valet parking today, and it is, for the most part, included as part of the overhead of that business. That's the envision of this also.
I agree. I'm just
Mr. Mayor?
trying to understand
I agree.
what we're.
That's
Sure.
where we're at.
You know, looking at the conditions, it's staff's position that condition A5 says customer parking for customers and patrons of the non-residential uses on the subject property shall be free, period.
And we agree with that recommendation.
And so, you know, from our perspective, that's something that's being required, and it's the petitioner's obligation to enforce that if you are a customer of that business, the parking shall be free.
I agree. We just spent a couple minutes, they'll go back and forth, so that's why I'm trying to make sure that everything that's in here is everything that they're agreeing to.
Yes.
Okay.
We've spent, I think Charles will hopefully agree, a very significant amount of time on especially this section A. Okay, customer parking restricted to 4 hours. What that was is we just didn't want commuter parking.
Sure.
In the garage. So that's why that 4 hours would be, it would be a limit of 4 hours. But as Deb said, we're going to have full-time surveillance of the garage and who's parked there and how long they're parked there. So, you know, if someone goes to a restaurant and goes to dinner, we're not going to tow their car if they're 4.5 hours.
Okay, excellent. And maybe I should have started out telling you that, you know, from the day of early review last fall, when you guys made significant progress.
Very much so.
The juggernaut of the traffic flow that I saw in your original proposal. So, I mean, yes, I'm asking you a lot of critical questions. Maybe I should have started out telling you that I like the changes that you've made to it. But everyone's here and we need to go home too. So let me keep going. So I'm very appreciative of the LEED certification that you guys are working on. I think having a green component to that building will not only benefit the residents in the neighborhood around you, as well as the village, but it'll also benefit the people that live in those buildings and benefit the project overall through the brand of the project that people want to live in a LEED building. So thank you for that. So, you know, we see that the economy continues to change. You know, when you purchased the property in 2000, and then obviously the economy collapsed in 2007, 8, depends on who you talk to. And so it's obviously taken some time for the economy to kind of regain its strength for you to want to develop that property. So if you build the building, the two taller buildings, how can we ensure that the third building gets built so that there is that buffer between the residents on Chestnut and the two taller buildings?
I don't know. I would take a suggestion, but nothing is guaranteed. I mean, if we can't get the financing for it, if there's no demand for it, if there is, there are a myriad of reasons why we couldn't, but I will tell you absolutely unequivocally that unless we build that building, this project is going to lose money. It doesn't make sense to build this project unless you build the Chestnut building, because you are upfront paying for almost all of the parking except for 58 spots. So you're paying 90% of the parking up front for this entire project, 100% of the infrastructure, all of the other work, all the detention, all the utilities, and everything else. As many people in business know, especially in the development business, you make your money on the last 10% of what's there. So the incentive to build that project is that the developer will not be able to break even if they don't build the Chestnut building.
Okay. Well, I want the residents that live in that area, especially the ones that live on Chestnut, to hear that. And so that's why I'm asking you the question.
It's
I've met with several of
excellent
the residents, and they have many concerns, and I want to make sure that, although I'm supportive of the overall concept, that their concerns are being addressed. And so that's kind of why I'm going through my list of notes. Because, you know, they may not be thrilled at the end of tonight, but at least they know that we're addressing the issues that they've addressed with us. So on the affordable housing issue, you can have a seat because I'm going to
fine,
kind of
great.
say make a few comments. So when the affordable housing guidelines were created, I was not on the board, nor was the majority of the people on this board, and they are guidelines. And over the years, this has come up several times, and the most recent time that it really kind of came to head for me as a trustee was when we were looking at a new development that was going to be on Kensington near Mariano's. And I specifically asked the developer, why is it that you can't provide these units? And why are you willing to do the cash in lieu of? Why wouldn't you want, you know, affordable housing units in the building? And the reason was because of the bank financing. And banks have a really difficult time going in perpetuity without anything. I don't know if you've tried to, even when you try to get a loan, sometimes it's difficult to get them to lock in a rate, let alone lock in a major development like this. And this was a much smaller development that we were approving as a village board, but it was still important that I wanted to understand, why is it? And, you know, this, you know, and I've gone back and I've looked at the affordable housing guidelines and tried to understand how we got to where we were. And I think affordable housing is really important. It's an important goal for us as a community to strive for. And affordable housing has been used in many developments in town, and I can tell you that I know teachers, or a teacher, I should say, a teacher who had bought an affordable unit. And I think that the affordable units are really important to, you know, young professionals that are just starting out in their career and maybe aren't making the money that they strive to. They're also great units for people who are trying to downsize for whatever reason it is. You know, maybe someone is sick, maybe someone has lost a loved one. But I think that those are important. You know, we need to take care of those that are kind of come up and take care of our community, and those that have taken care of our community and now are kind of in their sunset years. So I think affordable housing is important. There is no community around us that is developing right now that has any kind of guidelines, let alone an ordinance. You look at Mount Prospect, Des Plaines, Palatine, Buffalo Grove. You look at all these communities that surround this village, and they don't have guidelines. And so there's no requirement for them to do it or even suggestion for them to do it. And because that doesn't exist, we now have to do everything we can to want to have developers come to town because, you know, why go to Arlington Heights? I can just build in a neighboring town and not have to deal with that, because it does create additional hurdles when you're dealing with the banks. And, you know, when people say that the developer, you know, can afford to lose a little bit on his profit, let's all realize, okay, that if they give 5% affordable units, okay, that the 95% of the people in the building are paying the difference on the 5%. This is not coming out of a developer's pocket. I mean, think about that. This is going to go on for years. So we had a 15% number in our guidelines. So that would mean that the 85% of the people in the building need to help subsidize the rent for the other 15%. Okay, and that is just not going to be realistic in this marketplace. And that's why I am supportive of the 5% that's going to be put forward, an additional 2.5% in lieu of. And we as a village need to be a little bit more firm on what our affordable housing goals are, because we do have these guidelines out there, but the guidelines are so high. How do we get to the 15% number? I bet you any money it's because we need to achieve a 10% number. And if we don't set the number at 10% or higher, how are we ever going to try and maintain a 10% number? Because when you look at our housing stock and as it continues to turn over, those properties end up getting redeveloped and they become more expensive. No one is taking their house and going, you know what, I'd like to sell it for less so it can make it an affordable unit. That's not happening. People are improving their housing stock. So I know I'm up here kind of, preaching, but I mean, I've thought about this for a long, long time because we as a board have struggled with this over the years, over and over again, because it is important to all of us that we have affordable housing, but it's very, very difficult to kind of get the message out there. Everyone in this room is kind of sitting here and really listening right now, and hopefully people are at home are really taking this in because it is a complex issue that is important to all of us. And affordable housing should be important to all of us because all of us, have someone that we know that when they're just starting out, we want to give them every advantage we can to be a good citizen and do good things. And I can tell you that people who are young and want to do good things, that those are the people that we want to be our citizens because they will definitely give back to us. I'm almost done and then I'll let it go. I think that, when people have talked about the whether or not it fits in with the character of the neighborhood, and I did review, the minutes from the design commission, and while they don't specifically say that they're talking about the character of the neighborhood, they are talking about the overall development. And I think what's important about a lot of what they say is they talk about the traditional look, which I think is what the neighborhood looks like, and then it kind of transitions into a little bit more modern. And the way that I looked at the character of the neighborhood and I look at the character of this development is that it doesn't have to match the neighborhood. It needs to complement the neighborhood. And I think it makes a lot of sense to go kind of from traditional to a little bit more modern. And while some people don't like the look of the glass, I think it's appealing. And I think that there's other buildings in the downtown that, while they're traditional in nature, have to find a way to also be a little bit more contemporary because, you look at the Metro Lofts, because they also want to find people who are looking for something that's a little bit more unique and is a little bit different than the traditional condo or apartment. So I will be supportive and would be willing to make a motion at the appropriate time. I thank you for the time, Mayor.
Okay, thanks, Trustee Scaletta. Trustee LaBedz.
Thank you, Mayor Hayes. First of all, I want to thank everyone who is here tonight. I thank the developer and his team for the work they've done and the staff for all the work they've done, the boards and commissions that have spent so much time going through this process. I want to thank all of you residents who are here tonight, as well as all the many people that have contacted every one of us in differing amounts in differing ways, sometimes a call, sometimes an email, sometimes in person. I appreciate all of that input. I have gone through all the material. I've considered all the various points involved. I have a few kind of small questions, actually, and that I'd first like to ask the developer that I have to do really kind of with the environmental part of things. You already mentioned the seeking LEED certification if possible, and I do appreciate that. One of the things that had been brought up to me was, will this complex make it easy for residents to recycle? And how are you going to approach that? That's something a group expressed some interest to me.
As with any Briarwood management property, We actually put in a comprehensive recycling plan before the building is opened, and that entails recycling on every floor by the trash chute that'll be in the building. So we will have segregated buckets that will be used by type of recycling, and then that matter is taken by our waste contractor into a recycling plant. So yes, and we will be doing, as are required by the village, to do yearly reporting on our recycling plan.
Great, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. One thing also, it's actually speaks to the glass on the building, and a concern that I have is the fact of the nature of the glass, that it's non-reflective, as I understand it's supposed to be. Will that help keep migratory birds from running into it? That's something that I'm sorry if this comes out of left field to you, but working in the loop, I see the people from the bird collision monitors picking up birds that have hit buildings. I've even helped them a couple of times. So I don't know if you know anything about that.
I can only give you an experiential answer to that. Having worked in an office building downtown with clear glass, where the area behind the glass is also clear, I can't get into a bird's brain, although I've been called that, but in any event, a bird might think that they might not see the glass and just keep going. I've walked into many glass doors myself, hence the nose, but with the bronzing on this building, that's not going to be able to, that's not going to be the case. We started out with a much clearer, lighter glass, and that was in fact mentioned at a meeting, and we felt that with the darker bronzing of the glass, not only would there not be a sun reflection, that it would not appear as if there were nothing there. That's it.
Sure.
Okay.
A tinted glass will help.
Okay, that's good. Besides the fact, thank you.
Told me I talk too
appreciate,
much, but he's right.
That you're already working on the fact that it's non-reflective, because I've been blinded by other office buildings when the sun is at a particular level. So thank you for that response. And again, sorry if that came out of left field. And another thing, in terms of the landscape plan, something that I've actually been schooled on recently is the proper planting of trees. And when I looked at, I don't know if the appropriate word is a cut sheet or the diagram that showed how the trees would be planted, one of the things I've learned recently, and I've actually begun to read a fair amount about, is in terms of the depth of the trees, that you should have the flare above the ground. And it seemed to me that the pictures, at least on the landscape plan, indicated that they would be planted possibly too deeply, and we certainly wouldn't want to lose trees because they weren't planted appropriately. Now, maybe that's just because that's how the thing was drawn, but I think
is here to help with any questions.
that would be great. Thank you.
From Hitchcock Design.
Okay.
Thanks.
Good evening.
Name.
I think the drawing that was probably submitted in the set was for the tree grates, which definitely the root ball and the flare is below grade because it's just the whole nature of the tree grate and the pavement. But yes, you're absolutely right. On a normal tree planting detail, the flare needs to be slightly above the ground, and our standard detail reflects that. So we'll make sure that gets
Can you
done.
just give your name for the record?
Joel Baldwin, Hitchcock Design Group. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. Those were my small comments. I also want to mention, as Ms. Harp said and as the mayor said, you know, there was a time when this downtown was not this downtown. And I've lived near the downtown since 1980, so I have seen the redevelopment. I have seen the opposition at the time, and then of the same people who were very, very much opposed growing to love what the downtown has become. I think about the difficult decisions those board members made at that time, and even with some of the subsequent additions, not just the first ones with Dutton Tower, but the things as things were built and developed, further developed. And I do think this is, obviously the last major piece of land here, other than the south portion of this development, and it's time to fill it in. I think it's a valid point that any of all three of these buildings could easily be 8 stories high, and yet, so it may not be ideally the step down that residents would like to see, or that discussions during the master plan task force, and that it still does step down somewhat. They are guidelines, as Mr. Perkins has pointed out. So I do think that it's a good project. It's not a perfect project, as many people have said, and I would imagine the developer probably even says it's not absolutely perfect. They'd probably have some things they'd want to do, but given our requirements, may not want to. I appreciate very much the parking that you've included, and I also want to say I very much appreciate Trustee Canty's suggestion for the reduced rates and your willingness to make a reduction in the rate for those 18 units. So I do very much appreciate that. As to affordable housing, it is very important to me. I've said it many times. I also realize, this is not at all publicly funded. There's no TIF monies. There's no other kind of funding mechanisms, which actually are some of the funding mechanisms that were used to develop some of the other affordable projects that are here in the village. So that makes it more difficult to maybe have an ideal amount. So I'd rather have 18 than none. Of course, more would be nice, but I'm willing to go with the staff proposal. In essence, I am in favor of the proposal, and I appreciate all your time, and would be willing to second a motion. Thanks.
All right, let me go. I'm going to go this way. Trustee Schwingbeck.
Thank you, Mayor Harris. I just want to say a couple of things. As a new member on the board, I realize this is only my second meeting, but I have really followed this plan from the get-go and spent a lot of time as a resident, going to all the meetings, and then once I started running for office, I attended the Design Commission meetings, the Planning Commission meetings, spent a lot of time talking to immediate neighbors, talking to other residents about this project, and I am ready to vote on this. I'm extremely familiar with what's going on. As I've said before, I want to do what's in the best interest of the village of Arlington Heights, and I really appreciate the hard work that you guys have spent on this project, and I think it's wonderful, not only for the downtown but for the village. I do have a couple of things I wanted to just talk about, though. We talked briefly about stop signs, and I certainly realize you can go back. Staff can go back and evaluate this. I never really thought much about travel along Campbell and Sigwald, even having lived here for 30-plus years. I know that residents in this town and people passing through the town have a tendency to find streets that don't have stop signs on them. It gives them access through the village. Residents avoid major intersections by going through neighborhoods. So I did go out and drive around a little bit with the sole purpose of looking at our at Campbell and Sigwald, and we do have a few other intersections where the roads don't line up perfectly, but when you leave Ridge and you're coming from the west into our downtown, once you pass Ridge on both those streets, there's no stopping until you get to Vale. And I would agree that I think it would be a very good idea to slow people down before they get to the downtown area at Chestnut. So if we could really look hard at that, I certainly think stopping people at Highland on both Campbell and Sigwalt is important, but I really think we need to slow them down before that. The other question I have is just on building management, if somebody can maybe answer that. When you look at affordable housing, and I think affordable housing is extremely important, and you look at these units, we talked here about giving these units to Arlington Heights residents, employees of the businesses and organizations, and our veterans. And having never managed a property like this, I'd like to throw out a scenario of somebody coming in and meeting the guidelines for these affordable units, just a single individual, maybe renting a one-bedroom unit, and then all of a sudden a second individual happens to move in. There's only one person on the lease, and that second person is making a pretty good living. So I'd like to try and understand how we're going to manage these affordable units to really make them available for people that need them.
There is affordable housing language that will be put in the rent agreements for the affordable housing unit that requires them to comply with the residency requirement based on their salary or their household average wage. So they are not allowed then to bring in another person into that unit necessarily and to qualify for affordable housing if that is not part of the equation that was used on the front end, because they actually have disqualified themselves, and that's very standard in the rental industry, just so you're aware.
Okay. Yeah, and I don't have any other questions, again, because I've asked a lot leading up to this, but I'm very much in favor of the project.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Schwingbeck. Next, Trustee Baldino.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I have a question directed at Randy, although you may not be the one to answer this question. And it's already kind of sort of been answered already. But it has to do with the stop signs. And I am very much in favor of the stop signs on Highland. I also agree that we should look at putting stop signs on Chestnut. But Randy, when you and I talked, you told me that there weren't going to be any stop signs. And like I said, yeah, I'm very much in favor of having the stop signs there. Is that because the village is being proactive about pedestrian and traffic safety, or was there a reinterpretation of the traffic study? I guess this is for my own edification. Sure. No, and if I misspoke, I apologize. What I had meant in that conversation is that we weren't recommending going forward with a four-way stop at Chestnut and Campbell, based on the results of the traffic study. That the traffic study had indicated that the level of service at that intersection wasn't going to be negatively impacted enough to warrant that. But as has been mentioned, we can always reconsider that, with the direction of the board and now, or based on our experience as we get a little bit further along, or after some further study prior to the building being constructed. Okay, thank you. So I misunderstood what you were talking. I very well may have misspoke, Trustee Baldino. I apologize. All right.
most of my questions have been answered either in the presentations or the questions from the other board members. So what I will say is this. I was excited to see this project come along from the preliminary review stage of the process, both because I thought the project was right-sized and because of the developer's commitment to affordable housing. So let me sort of address those separately. One of my biggest concerns was the number of stories on the Chestnut building. It was originally at 5.5 stories, and it's now down to 4, which was something that I was very concerned about. I'm very happy to see that happen, even though I understood very early on that if we brought the height of that building down, it was likely going to have an impact on the other 2 buildings. And so I was willing to make that trade-off in order to assure that transition from the higher buildings closer to the downtown towards the residential side on Chestnut. So I was very happy to see that. So that combined with a lot of the other things that have been spoken about here tonight, I felt that this project was right-sized, it was very well designed, it was a great concept, and I was very excited about the project in and of itself. When the staff recommendation came out based on the negotiations, I was disappointed in the number of affordable housing units. I really wanted to see more units. But at the end of the day, based on the discussions here, I am still as excited about the project in and of itself. And at the end of the day, 18 units is more units than we've seen in some of the recent projects that have come before this board. It's 18 more units than we're going to have if this project doesn't move forward. And I'm even more willing to accept the 18 units if there's a break in the parking fees. So without gilding the lily anymore, I will just voice my support for this project as it's been presented to the board tonight. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Trustee Baldino. Trustee Rosenberg.
Thank you, Mayor. So what would be a meeting without asking about parking, as Mike Cedar used to say? So Charles, can you explain to me, are we going to use the 1.3 or the 1.5 standard?
The studies that I showed were based on the 1.3 ratio, looking at the shared parking model. However, it actually equates to a little less than that when you look at how much spaces are actually being provided. So, they're proposing basically 160 non-residential spaces broken out by 134 on the lower level and first level and up the ramp to the second. And then there's 26 as kind of a combination of some residential guests and non-residential. So that covers, pretty much the weekday commercial demand. It doesn't quite cover the weekend projection. And then leaving the 347 for 307 units, plus some being able to park, later on in the evening in that 26 combination zone. So you're really going to be at a ratio of about 1.13, somewhere around there, for the parking per unit in the Highland and the Campbell building. So based on the developer's parking study and some adjacent developments in other communities, they indicated that they could manage that and they can control that by how many spaces each unit is allowed. Also, keep in mind there's a lot more studios and 1-bedrooms than there are 2-bedrooms. So there's a higher percentage of smaller units in this development than, say we might have seen in other developments in the past, like Hancock Square or Dunton Towers.
So obviously, when you looked at those charts that you gave us at 1.5, in almost, I don't know, probably over half the time frames were deficits as opposed to the 1.3. So I was just curious, it was on page 29 of the staff report.
Yeah, and it's a little better than that because the staff report was written before the changes and the project was continued at the Plan Commission hearing, and the revised plans have more parking in there,
I
so.
think they added, 21 more spaces? I
Added
think it was.
21 more spaces of a net gain, and then they shifted some of the spaces from the Chestnut building into that garage, which is why we have the 26 kind of dual use type zone.
So, in the Chestnut building, we have 54 units. Your original requirement, I think, said 61 and a half, and they provided 58, correct?
Correct.
So are we concerned if for some reason that doesn't become rental versus condo, is there gonna be a significant, or will that shortage then be picked up by what's in the Campbell Highland parking garage?
It's possible. We are concerned about that if any of the buildings were to change from apartments to condos, because we typically see a higher parking ratio in an ownership unit than rental. So there is a condition in the recommendation that requires a PUD amendment if they wish to convert any of the buildings into a condominium.
But excuse me for interrupting, but I thought that the Chestnut building was at the developer's discretion and didn't have to go through a PUD if it was changed.
Originally that was the case, but when they shifted parking from the Chestnut building into the Highland Campbell building, a final recommendation changed. So now there is a condition that says that any change to condominium requires a PUD amendment for any of the buildings.
Okay. All right, thank you. And then, I guess, I had questions on these.
So number 26, Trustee Rosenberg, is that revised condition.
Okay. Thank you. On those charts that we got that show the different colorations, like these, I guess I'm confused as to where there's shaded colors, multiple colors on floor, like that corner area up on the top, toward the top, how those to be determined as to whether it's a restaurant retail versus I guess, office? Is there a distinction that you can address?
Is that a ramp?
Yes. We're going to have an area for primarily office parkers during the day. You don't have a lot of office tenants in the evening. Keep in mind that we have allocated, I think, 7,500 square feet of the commercial space to office. It's not an immense number. So some of the shading means it could be used for either, okay? We are not going to say, if you're in an office, we are going to tell the office people in their lease, this is your parking area, okay? And we may very well sign it office parking only 9 to 5 in that area. So after hours, like you have in your garage, you take off some of the limitations. So some of the shared parking is why you have the two shaded colors. Okay, the bottom line is that 347 spaces are going to be restricted to residents, and the balance of the garage will be used for the office, valet, commercial. I believe the recommendation also says, and will be adjusted based on need and usage. So our interest is making sure we don't lose people who rent offices because they can't find a parking space. Right. Or we don't lose restaurant customers because there's no room in the garage. So it's in the developer's best interest to make sure that we monitor that, as Deb said we are going to, and it will shake out that we'll know in a very short order if we need more office, less office, more guest parking, less guest parking, and we'll adjust it accordingly.
So basically, you'll design it in such a way that you'll be able to either redo the signage or adjust the area?
100%.
accordingly? Okay,
100%.
great.
Thank you.
The apartment mix that you have designated, is that something that has been determined by your studies or your market studies as far as how many studios, ones, and two bedrooms?
Yes, we had a full-blown market study and in fact changed some of the mix and actual unit sizes based on the market study from Integra.
Will any of those be able to be changed in the future as far as that goes, or can reconfigured at all if you have a change in the marketplace as far as any of those, that there's more demand for one versus the other?
Well, we try to maintain the flexibility. We're not going to lease 307 units out in 1 or 2 months. So if we find that we're running out of studios or we're running out of one bedrooms on floors that are not completed yet, it could possibly change. I don't see it going up because we have limitations on density. So pretty much if we did something like that, we'll comply with whatever the village requirements and our ordinance requirements are for those adjustments.
Okay. I just want to echo some of the other comments that some of the trustees made about thanking you for all your time, the developers' time, the staff time, and commission members also. I think it's a good project. I've always liked it. I don't have an issue with the 13 stories because I know that causing that to be 13 stories is the parking that you've created, and so it's a necessary, it's a need that we have, and so I appreciate you doing that. I think you guys have done a great design with this, and I think the village as a whole does need this type of project, and it drives the village as a whole. I mean, I appreciate some of the neighbors' disdain for this and not happy with some of it, but I think it's something that, again, I feel when the Block 425 South End came up, I was in favor of it because I think it was something that the downtown needed, and same with this project also. You know, we represent the village as a whole, not necessarily as just the downtown area, and so I think we need sometimes to look at what's best for the village. So I'm in favor of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Rosenberg. Trustee Padovani.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I want to start by thanking our petitioner for all the work that they've done to bring forward a really, really well-designed project, but also because you listened. All the time you spent listening to our residents, to our staff, to our board, and making those adjustments that have brought this project so far from where it started from. It's really appreciated on so many levels. And I want to thank our staff for all the really hard work you guys have done bringing this forward and listening again, like you have, and really trying to consider and look for all these incredible little things that made a big difference. And then I'd like to thank all of the residents here and the ones that have been giving us input all throughout this time, how important it is what you've done on affordable housing, on the design of the project, on everything. You've made the project a much better project than when it started. And I think that's really important, and we'd always want our residents and our businesses to be very much involved in this. Given that, I have a few questions about the development or about the project itself, and the first one that's really probably highest on my mind is the safety of pedestrians. Resident Carrie Dwyer, she lives on Chestnut, and she's spoken to me and spoken to others about the safety of kids crossing not only Chestnut but Sigwalt and all. And the stop signs are a start. And this is a question for Mr. Recklaus here, is we put up these stop signs with these crosswalks to at least alert the drivers to, you know, there's a pedestrian here. Is there anything more that can be done so that kids, especially kids, can cross the street in safety? Anything more than what we have here?
You know, a lot of the steps that have been taken already in terms of shortening that distance, putting bump outs, they serve two purposes. One, they make it safer for pedestrians to cross because there's less distance across the street, but then also they signal to motorists that when you see that you're entering kind of a more pedestrian-friendly area. So I do want to applaud staff's efforts so far to make it, to do what they've done so far. Additional stop signs certainly would, slow down traffic in that area. However, as Trustee Schwingbeck indicated, sometimes people do find routes in other areas, and while I agree there aren't along that area, there isn't a stop sign until you get to Vale. It's something that we would have to give it a good second look for me to give a definitive answer on what exactly we could do. Sometimes, in some circumstances, studies have indicated that stop signs, when you have too many of them, people will accelerate faster between stop signs. And so we do like to look at those things thoroughly and scientifically, and we do think that the foundation of that traffic study is strong, but I'm happy to have staff give this a second look based on the input that we're hearing from the trustees this evening with an eye towards pedestrian safety and not just vehicular control.
Good. I appreciate that because even after the project is built, we'd all be concerned about safety through that area. There are some residents that talked about Highland being a thoroughfare parallel to Arlington Heights Road with no stoplights there, so people are zooming down Highland at what they called high speeds. Could I ask that the staff look into that particular thoroughfare or that particular route and see if there's any control that should be put in there, whether it's stop signs or other things?
We can do a couple of things. I mean, we can do I can instruct the police department to do a speed study there. We have ways of kind of examining speeds that are very discreet to just kind of observe and collect some data, but we can certainly study that a little bit more closely for sure.
All right, please do, because that is something that I've seen people kind of use it as a speedway because it's easier than Arlington Heights Road, and we want to make sure that that's safe as well a couple blocks south of this project. Next is I read the downtown master plan, which it's 2007 when it was brought forward. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, 2007. And there's a lot in there, and it's really well thought out, as you can tell. But in the ensuing 12 years, in a lot of ways, life has changed a lot. And one of the things, help me if I'm got this wrong, but one of the things I didn't see in the downtown master plan is the requirement that we are now putting on developers that the developments must be self-parked. Is that true? It's what's missing there that I'm reacting to.
Yeah, I don't recall that being discussed at the task force when that was going on. I do know right around then projects like Metro Lofts came along, and they actually paid a fee for the parking demand that they generated in addition to their monthly permits that they buy. And that fee went into a fund towards some of the costs of the expansion of the garage. But most developments other than Village Green and Arlington Town Square across the street, where the residential had met their own parking needs, the commercial typically didn't.
Okay.
There's some surface parking in both of those developments, but it doesn't meet all of their demand.
Certainly not to the degree that this project does, for sure.
Right, right. So going forward, because of the overall parking needs downtown, every new project that's going to come forward is going to have to be self-parked, correct?
Correct. That's
All
the
right.
direction we've received from the board is that, we really, absent, something new that we're not contemplating right now, we currently don't have any other opportunities to expand the public parking in our downtown area.
Okay.
Well, you know, you might have a small infill site similar to the one that we had on Minor, where it's just not practical.
Mm.
You know, you can't really accommodate parking, so smaller infill, you could see that would be accommodated in our garages if we had sufficient capacity.
Mhm.
And then conversion of the existing buildings to new spaces like Hainani.
Right.
Obviously, they can't convert and provide parking. So those two scenarios I could see, you know, would over time, we'd have to look at whether we could accommodate the parking in our current parking system.
Okay, so when the master plan talks about 6 to 8 story buildings, it's not anticipating that we're also telling the developer, you have to have parking in that. And the garage in this 13-story building, the garage is 7 floors of that 13?
The garage is 6 with 1 underground.
Okay.
So I think when we were looking early on at the Vale Garage, before we actually had projections from a prior consultant that projected a demand from this Block 425 for their. They had a plan at one point. It might have been 3 8-story buildings. I'm not sure. 2 8 stories and a 4-story, but we hadn't expanded the garage, and we had projections that would accommodate some of their parking demand. Not all of it, but some of it.
So you could have had 3 8-story buildings in that lot, but because you're trying to step down into the neighborhood with single-family homes across the street on Chestnut, it was a nicer transition with the Chestnut building with the 4-story row homes there.
That and the garage, the need for them to provide parking, and the fact
Right.
we built the garage over the street
Okay.
really does dictate how they can lay their site out.
Okay. Well, thank you on that. Also, I wanted to say on the subject of affordable housing, being a veteran myself and having helped veterans for over 15 years in all kinds of situations, and some of them with housing needs, having affordable housing in this particular development available for veterans is really important. I can't tell you how much we appreciate it. It's just one of those things that if we can keep our veterans in our town, as well as anyone who's grown up and lived here in this town, it's a real important thing to me, to all of us, to our veterans here, as well as our residents. One thing I do want to say with regard to the affordable housing, I'm kind of looking at it, the equation from 2 sides. Yes, we should have affordable housing units for our residents, our veterans, but it's also important that we have big and important projects like this that are taking like an empty lot like this 425 block and going from whether it's $30,000 or $34,000 of real estate taxes a year up to $1.5 million to $2 million a year. And this is just one of our projects here in Arlington Heights. I mean, we've got the one Arlington Place over near Euclid and 53. They're building another apartment building there. You've got the one on near Mariano's. You've got a whole corridor down south in Arlington Heights that we're working on, our staff are working on developing. And when you take the big picture of all this development, the importance of that is that all those underused properties are going to be bringing in more real estate tax from what was almost nothing. They'll bring us up, and we'll be working the other side of the equation by trying to take off some of the pressure, some of the real estate tax pressure on our residents, so that if they're finding it hard to live in their homes, unaffordable to live in their homes, by doing this, we're going to at least take away some of that real estate tax pressure from them and hopefully help them stay there or maybe find some of that affordable housing. So all the developments we're working on here, I'm really happy to see that in our village, especially since we've got a lot of open spaces or underutilized spaces, and our board and our staff are really working hard to find those opportunities to really pop up the economy of Arlington Heights. So overall, I'm really impressed with this development, with the proposal, with the affordable housing, and I'm very much in favor of getting this thing rolling.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Padovani. Well, everyone's had an opportunity to give their comments one time.
Can I just add?
Hold on one second. Let's get a motion on the floor, and then we'll have additional comments. Okay. Trustee Scaletta.
Thank you, Mayor. I would concur with the Plan Commission recommendation as well as staff's recommendation for affordable housing in the amount of 18 units at the 60% and a payment in lieu of the other 9 units.
Second.
There's a motion by Trustee Scaletta, seconded by Trustee Rosenberg. Further questions by Trustee Canty.
I just wanted to add one thing new, so you don't always get it right the first gate. I do think that we need to find a way to be more concrete in our expectations to developers and others in the business industry around our strategy around affordable housing. I know we're going to be talking about it later this summer, but if we can just make sure that that is a key priority so that it's clear for staff when you're trying to negotiate, it's clear to developers coming in what we want and expect. In that regard, I think it would go a long way to furthering development here.
Mayor, can I respond to that?
Mr. Reckless,
I was just going to say, staff has heard the board loud and clear on that issue that they feel that our current guidelines are inadequate as a policy tool. And so this is something that very much is becoming is a front burner issue for staff over the next couple of months to try to come up with some options for the board and the community to consider as a way to work through this issue. And we're going to be looking for input not only from members of the community, but also the development community, and come up with a policy that we all can live with. But we very much have heard that message.
Okay. If nothing further from the board, let me just say before we vote that I very much appreciate the efforts of both the developer and the residents to make this a first-class, high-quality project. I mean, I really have to applaud the developer in trying to address the many issues that the residents and the staff and the board have brought up over the course of these 2 years. And it's noticeable that they've really done all they can to address the concerns, and bringing in a management team up front, I think was a really, really smart idea, just a great idea, and probably a model for us going forward in terms of future projects. So just a great job, I think, by the developer. And as Trustee Padovani indicated, the input of the residents has been critical to this process in making this a first-class, high-quality development. It wouldn't be where it's at, what we're going to approve tonight, I think, without the resident input. And so your efforts were not for naught, and we very much appreciate it. So with that, we have a motion and a second. If no further comments from the board, let's take a roll call.
Trustee Scaletta?
Yes.
Trustee Rosenberg?
Yes.
Trustee Schwingbeck?
Yes.
Trustee Padovani?
Yes.
Trustee Canty?
Yes.
Trustee Baldino?
Yes.
Trustee LaBedz?
Yes.
President Hayes?
Yes. Well, congratulations to the developer. And again, this is a team effort. And so I think moving forward, it's incumbent upon all of us to do what's in the best interest of this community. So we thank everyone involved in this process.
Once
Mr.
again,
Adriani.
I just want to say thanks to everybody that's here today, everybody that talked about housing. I'm very much in favor of that, and I'd be happy to work on a committee and put my time and some of my staff's time in to help you get to the point where you want to be regarding housing. I think it's important, and I've done a lot of charity work in town, monetarily speaking, to a lot of different charities, and I will continue to do that to some of the people that have been here before. And once again, thank you to our team, the residents, the board, the staff, and everybody else here tonight that's been involved in this long process. It's been a long, arduous task, but one that's been quite fulfilling to us. And I think everybody looking at this from both sides, when it's completed, will be happy to say, I never thought it would be this nice. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adriani. Appreciate it. All right, there's no other new business. Mr. Reckless, any report?
Nothing further.
All right, anything from the board under petitions and communications? Seeing none, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
By Trustee Padovani, seconded by Trustee LaBedz. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you all.
Let's move. Nice. Good comments.